Hello, this is Nosferatuesdays, where a horror writer and a scaredy cat discuss the cinematic history of Dracula.
Hi, I'm Avishai. I'm the horror writer.
And I'm Michal, the scaredy cat. And the movie we're going to be discussing today is 1992's Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
I'm excited to hear what you think about this movie. I really have no idea going in.
So remember at the end of last week when I was like, I'm excited to watch this movie?
I remember, and then we sat down immediately after recording to watch the movie.
We did. It's sure a movie.
It's a lot of movie. So I had seen this movie before, in anticipation of realizing it would probably be on this list. And yeah, I mean, I think it deserves to be on the list. I think it's important that we move through it because I do think it is important in the Nosferatu canon.
No, I definitely see that. Especially something that's attributing itself like specifically to Dracula and like the novel and rooting itself back to that origin point. But I will tell you, like halfway through the movie, I was like, were the 90s even real? And then like by the time the movie ended, I was like, am I real? I don't know what's going on anymore.
It's an odd duck of a movie, to put it mildly. So just to give a little bit of broader context, there are a lot of Dracula movies, and we are not going to talk about most of them unless this podcast becomes the most popular podcast in the world. Then we have to come back, and we are doomed to do this forever and ever.
Somebody sponsor us.
But, you know, if we're going to look specifically at Nosferatu and the movies that are directly inspired by it and dovetail with it and dovetail with later adaptations of that original Nosferatu, this movie is important for a number of reasons. It is, to this day, the only Dracula movie to win Oscars. It is...
Well, we'll see.
To this day, as of this recording. As of...
December 24th. 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
But it did win Oscars. It is, I believe, the first actual big budget Dracula adaptation. It does draw some inspiration from the original Nosferatu in some specific ways.
Yes.
We are told that it is referenced in some specific or non-specific ways in the upcoming Eggers movie. By upcoming, I mean tomorrow it comes out. But it also did create a new iconography of the cinema Dracula and the cinema vampire. It's also important for other reasons. But suffice it to say, it's a big one. It's a weird one. It's a divisive one. It has legions of fans and legions of detractors, and I am in both camps. I know what camp you're in, Michal.
I mean, I strive to be an enigma as always, but you know.
But yes, this is Francis Ford Coppola, the director.
Sorry, I need to say it again. It's 1992's Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Well, he didn't call it 1992. But yes, it is. Francis Ford Coppola wanted to call this Bram Stoker's Dracula, as opposed to just Dracula or just D, as apparently he considered calling it at one point. He wanted Bram Stoker's name in there.
That would be a very appropriate name.
Okay, he wanted to call it Bram Stoker's Dracula because, this is anecdotal, I don't know how true this is, he noticed a pattern in his own movies that he would frequently include the author's name prior to the adaptation that he directed. So Mario Puzo's The Godfather, John Grisham's The Rainmaker. And so it just made sense to him, and also just to differentiate from, at this point, the countless Dracula movies.
Countless.
But also it does, as I understand it, and again, I have not actually read the book. I've read so many summaries of the book and so many analyses of the book, but I've not read the book itself. You've read the book?
I read the book in college, and I am about a third of the way through it now. So, plus, I've skipped ahead to some significant elements.
Yeah. So as I understand it, this movie is pretty dang faithful to the book, with the exception of one major element. But before we get into that, should we talk about Coppola?
Please, tell me about Coppola.
So was this your first Coppola movie?
Probably. I've seen parts of The Godfather, but I definitely have not seen the whole film.
Okay, so Francis Ford Coppola, one of the most important and influential directors in American cinema, came up around the same time as as Spielberg, as George Lucas, as Scorsese, that sort of new wave of American directors, new generation with their own instincts and aesthetics and styles, inspired by movies, as opposed to, as Hitchcock put it, the proscenium arch. Because the way that Hitchcock saw it, so this is a Hitchcock talking about Spielberg.
Okay.
But Hitchcock praised Spielberg, saying that, calling him the first among us, and this is not completely accurate, but it's close enough, to to be inspired by movies when making his movies, as opposed to inspired by the stage.
Oh, interesting.
Because this is a new art form.
Mm-hmm.
This was newer then than it is now, but
it's interesting that we're talking about this in the latest, as we said, this is from 1992, the latest film we're discussing.
Yeah, well, this movie is almost upon 100 years of cinema.
Yeah.
Right? Which it makes a pretty big point of in the actual movie,
mm-hmm.
but movies are new, and in the era in the late 60s and 70s and early 80s that these new directors were coming up, they had grown up watching movies, and that inspired their styles, as opposed to just iterating on theater,
mm-hmm.
or iterating on painting, or iterating on other existing art forms. So you have these new filmmakers doing some pretty daring stuff. Coppola, The Godfather Part 2,
mm-hmm.
The Godfather Part 3.
I have heard of all of those movies.
Yes. Godfather Part 3 is kind of a separate thing. Well,
mm-hmm.
that's also relevant, so I'll bring that up in a
okay.
second. But he makes The Conversation, he makes Apocalypse Now. He's kind of on top of the world, repeatedly comes close to utter disaster, but always manages to pull off a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
He co-founded a company called American Zoetrope mm-hmm. with George Lucas, where he wanted to give
so many Star Wars connections.
Yeah, well, they were all close friends and gave each other notes on their early cuts and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And Lucas gave some notes on this one, apparently, that influenced the ending.
The dialogue is very Lucas.
That's not the thing. That's not the thing that he influenced. But
I'm just saying, compare this to Attack of the Clones. You might see some similarities there.
Anyway, so Zoetrope was supposed to be kind of a haven for filmmakers to create their art without worrying too much about the business side of things, without having the kind of the money overlords looking down and telling you what you can or can't do with your art. And the theory was, you let people make great art in a nurturing environment, then you foster new artists, you evolve the art form, and people will reward it. Mm-hmm. And people didn't really reward it. The company was going bankrupt. Coppola did a few things that he didn't really want to do. One of them was make a third Godfather movie. He didn't really think it was necessary, but, if financially times are tough, let's make a third one. Maybe this will save the company.
IP is not new.
IP is not new. He casts Winona Rider in The Godfather Part 3. Winona Rider pulls out at the last second because she's just spread too thin, forcing Coppola to infamously cast his daughter, Sofia Coppola, future famed director, but not such a great actor in that particular movie. Winona Rider feels bad about causing some delays and some consequences on that production, has a meeting with Coppola to kind of smooth things over and apologize and talk about a future project that they were considering working on. And then just kind of as an aside, she had a script with her written by James Hart, which he had started writing in 1977. Mm-hmm. That was going to be a TV movie based on the book Dracula. And she said, I bet you don't have time to read this right now, but if you'd like to, why don't you take a look at it? She puts it on the table. Coppola looks down at it, sees Dracula, says, oh man, I got to do this because I fucking love Dracula. And long story short, Bram Stoker's Dracula is the movie that pulls Zoetrope out of bankruptcy.
That's not what it's called, Avishai.
1992's Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Thank you.
1992 by Francis Ford Coppola, based on the novel by Bram Stoker, unrelated to F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu, 1922. Saves Zoetrope from bankruptcy and influences genre cinema for a while. So that's the overhead there.
Cool. That is actually very interesting.
There's a lot going on.
Is Zoetrope still around, or?
Ish. It's.
Let me guess. The strikes killed it off.
No, it never really found its footing again. But it is the production company at the top of Coppola's self-financed $120 million magnum opus Megalopolis, which I did see.
Yes.
and I have a feeling you would not like.
I get that sense. Considering the clips that you sent me from it, I don't think you liked it either.
I am glad that it exists.
Oh my god, that's such a cop-out. I used to think that was a good, a good way of looking at movies you didn't love, but now I'm just like, no.
Okay, so I'll say this about Megalopolis, which is a Dracula movie, obviously. But no, it's the thing about Megalopolis, in my opinion, is there are bad movies all the time that are made for, over $100 million.
Mm-hmm.
And they are always bad for kind of the same reasons.
Okay.
They're always kind of death by committee. And Megalopolis has no committee. There is just one guy in charge with nobody telling him no. And it's a very special kind of bad that we otherwise never get to have.
Okay.
So
auteur garbage.
It is art. I don't think it's good art, but it is undeniably art. And it tonally is a lot more like 1992's. Do I have to say it every time?
Yes, you do.
Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula than, say, The Godfather.
That's why this episode's going to be 3 hours long, because I'm just saying.
You're just padding out our runtime. For those metrics.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. Where were we?
History.
Yeah. That's the 30,000-foot view.
Cool.
There's more history to come that kind of comes out of specific little elements,
mm-hmm.
But this is a $40 million Dracula movie, which in today's money is closer to 90.
Wow. Still not crazy. I mean,
yeah, I mean that's still the fact that that's considered.
It's less than a $100 million movie, which
Yeah, by 10 million, right?
I mean, yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know. I think 10 million is a lot of money, but in these terms, maybe not.
It's interesting to think about in those terms because by today's standards, it is not very expensive for a blockbuster. It's a hell of a lot more expensive than the upcoming Nosferatu.
Mm-hmm.
It is a hell of a lot more expensive than any prior Dracula movie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think what the most expensive one prior to this one was. And I don't know, maybe the Monster Squad, in which Dracula shows up with the Frankenstein monster and the Wolfman and the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and it's kind of like a kid's movie, and it's pretty fun. And it's that one I think cost like $16 million in 1980s money,
wow.
which is still a lot by today's standards, but it's not this.
Yeah.
And also that's not an adaptation.
This is Dracula. Big budget, capital B, capital B.
Yeah, and also this is an adaptation of the book, and that wasn't. This
right.
is. And this, when you have money, you have more control over the aesthetics, whether you, in this case, is the director or the studio. I
mean, the aesthetics of this movie are kind of I think, most distinct element, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot to say about that.
Yes. Also, to give this movie some props, it's the first one we've watched that I've recognized any of the actors from.
This is true. And some of those actors do better than others.
Yes. And some of them start really promising, and then just...
So I think you loved this movie.
I love this movie. I'm glad that I didn't watch this movie alone. I kept hitting the couch at a certain point. You kind of hit a threshold where it's just oh, the joke's not ending, so you have to make the joke yourself. I apologize to anyone who loves this movie. It is extremely artistic, and I will give it props for that as we go through. But I think I'm not a 90s schlock person.
Kind of tangential to that. It's earlier this week, Patrick Willems, who, if you're not familiar, I recommend him. He's a YouTube video essayist who talks about film in a very informed manner that I really enjoy. He had a video out this week talking about the weird giant cities of 80s and 90s movies. You look at Tim Burton's Batman, and you look at he points out Babe 2, Pig in the City, and obviously you have Blade Runner. You have all these ridiculous over-the-top cities that are part set, part matte painting, part miniature, and figuring out where did that come from, where did that go. But when the Batman movies in the 80s were really popular, they influenced a lot of artifice in Hollywood, and Patrick points out that one of the directors who kind of for a moment dips his toes in that world is Coppola making this particular movie, because there was a 90s aesthetic in studios of big, lavish, artificial production that isn't really aiming for realism, it's aiming for style and grandness. And, you know, after those Batman movies started to be a little bit less popular with the Schumacher movies, suddenly the pendulum swung towards grittiness, and we kind of moved away from that. But it's interesting looking at what Coppola does with this, which we'll talk about, because he is so epically grounded in his other movies. In his prior movies, I'm going to say, because he's not super epically grounded in Megalopolis, but in his prior movies, he is, The Godfather is an American epic masterpiece, and Apocalypse Now feels like going to war. These are
movies about the real world set in the real world, where this is kind of neither of those.
And part of it also, part of it is aesthetic, and part of it is also just that Coppola had a reputation for running way over budget. Apocalypse Now was a debacle while they were making it. Every time he would make a movie, things would fall apart beyond his control, and it would just be hell, and it would just drive him crazy trying to actually bring it together, and it would be sort of a miracle that it would become not just good, but great. On this one, he wanted a little bit more control, and he didn't want to run super over budget, and so instead of filming outdoors, where suddenly there's weather and other concerns, do everything on a soundstage, everything is a studio, you have control over that. So part of it is aesthetic, but part of it is also just what you've got going.
I mean, so we're a little bit more within the arch than, maybe...
Yeah. No, this feels a little bit like a circus show in a way.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, we're talking a lot about this before we actually talk about what happens in this movie. But Coppola is a cinephile, and this movie takes place in 1897, which coincides with the dawn of cinema, and he wanted this movie to feel kind of timeless in that way. And so there's all of the special effects, for example, are special effects that could have been done with the technology at the time. When the original effects team said, no, we want to use green screens and special effects like a normal movie, which is a very reasonable thing to say in any circumstance, Coppola fired them and replaced them with his son Roman, who did a good job. I mean, there's some really eye-popping stuff in this, but it's all tricks. Right. It's all optical illusions and miniatures and forced perspective and some really fun stuff there.
This movie was paused several times while Avishai explained this was done like this, and this match cut is like this. And...
Yeah, and obviously it's there's no point where Coppola wants you to think this is really happening in the real world. But one of his influences on this was the original Nosferatu, because that was a silent film from the beginning of cinema, and he wanted to draw some visual parallels to that. So there, it's relevant.
Okay, cool. All right, should we get into the actual movie?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Okay.
There's a lot to talk about.
There is a lot to talk about. So the first thing, obviously we've been tracking kind of religious symbology through these films. And my question, going into any of these, is okay, so how prominent is the Christian imagery going to be? Well, I did not have to wait long for that question to be answered in this movie, because the very first shot is of a cross, against, it's of a massive cross. The first 5 minutes probably have more crosses than I've ever seen in my life. It is dripping with religious imagery.
Yeah, it's 1462, and we get a whole backstory to Dracula that does not exist in the novel, as far as I know.
No.
That ties him directly to Vlad the Impaler, who it is strongly theorized Bram Stoker based Dracula off of, or at least drew elements from the name Dracula comes from Vlad the Impaler.
Vlad Dracula.
I think this is the first major movie to actually draw that connection within the movie. Which is interesting. But we get a nice little backstory where Gary Oldman as Licorice Dracula in this wonderful muscle tendon armor suit is fighting the Turks in the name of Christ, and his wife Elisabetta, played by Winona Rider, she pines for his return, but even though he is victorious in battle, she
gets a letter.
She gets a letter shot through her window that says otherwise, and she jumps out her window and dies.
And then he comes home and he's like, I won and I'm good with God. And then finds out that his wife is dead, and not only dead, but damned because she has committed suicide.
Yeah, and
he doesn't take it well.
He does not take it well. He decides if that's how God's going to be, then he's going to be that way to God. Yep. And he thrusts the sword into a giant cross.
The cross starts to bleed.
The cross starts to bleed. Everything in the room starts to bleed. There's blood everywhere. It's glorious. Fun little point. So when we're seeing Dracula killing all those people in war, it's a big shadow play, mm-hmm. With a big translate background and all these silhouettes, and he's impaling people, which are clearly like kind of foreground, kind of hanging on wires in front of somebody who's holding up a stick.
Yeah, I don't think that's actually how the impaling worked. I mean, not to get too technical, but I do think it usually went through not the stomach plane, the other plane.
But what's the fun of that? I want to stab somebody and then pick them up.
So I think that's actually what they did.
But
you can stay alive for several days like that, depending on how carefully they do it.
Yeah. Fun, super quasi fact, because I don't know how intentional this was. Mm-hmm. I read a piece of I'm going to just cop to it, IMDb trivia. So who the hell knows? But they claim that when we see the field of impaled bodies, which are all in silhouette, one of them is very clearly Count Orlok from Nosferatu.
Oh. And
so I went back to look, and maybe
right.
he's kind of got sort of a funny shaped head, and he's kind of hunched over and has his big claws kind of pointed out. And you could make a case. I don't know how intentional that was. I haven't read anything about that, but if so, nice little homage.
Yeah. Leo pointing me matches the
chat. We have Anthony Hopkins as the priest in this opening scene.
Oh, he is? Okay. All right. I will admit, I really like that kind of device where, like, characters come back as other versions of themselves. That's like, that's obviously a big thing in, like, Peter Pan. And I always enjoy that kind of casting because it reflects on both characters.
Yeah. Little thing about Gary Oldman in this. This is his first big American production.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
He's kind of
he's giving.
He's giving. He's doing a lot.
There are so many different versions of Gary Oldman in this movie.
So there are a few points where we were watching the screen and we're like, wow, that is a high forehead. So they actually did shave a little bit of his hair.
Oh, okay.
To make him look a little bit more like Vlad the Impaler.
Mm-hmm.
So they pulled his hairline back a little bit. But apparently he was very method on set and didn't hang out with the actors except for rehearsals and scenes where it was necessary. And otherwise was apparently kind of weird.
All right, guys, I know it was the 90s, but no, we don't do method. We don't.
We can do real method, but there's real method and there's,
Jeremy Strong.
Yeah. But like there's Winona Rider and Winona Ryder and Gary Oldman didn't super get along on this production, and it's not 100% clear why. There's little rumored moments of like, oh, did he pull a mean trick on her? Was she just off put by his vibes? Or was there something else? They're friends now, but there was a whole thing at the time that apparently they were friends until they weren't. But Gary Oldman was very much involved in the creation of his character and had a lot of input in his costume and makeup, although the costume and makeup was famously, he says, while checking the name to make sure I'm not talking it up, the costumes were famously designed by the Japanese artist Aiko Ishioka, who won an Oscar for it.
The costumes are beautiful. I will say that unreservedly.
They're really something.
I don't know if negligees like that existed in 1897, but
Yeah, but yes, just where we start off with a whole origin story for Dracula that tries to posit him as a little mythic and a little sympathetic.
Yeah, but not really a sad boy. Kind of a mad boy.
Yeah, he's a little bit of kind of not a sad boy, kind of mad boy, a little bit of a trad boy. He's a
lad boy.
He's it's a very gothic romance that they're doing.
Yes. We hop to the present day, and we've got Renfield right front and center. Tom Waits. I like the addition that Renfield did originally go to Dracula, has become as ruined as he has come back, and somehow, I guess, failed to complete this transaction. Thus, Jonathan Harker must travel to Transylvania as his replacement.
Yeah, it's always fun to kind of track who Renfield is relative to the other characters in the story.
Yeah.
Right. In the 31 version, he is the Harker character essentially. He's the one we follow to the castle. And in Nosferatu, he's a weird little guy at home who stays at home.
Yeah.
And that's how he is in the book. We first meet him in a lunatic asylum.
Yeah, but I haven't gotten up to any point where the connection between Dracula or Harker and Renfield has been established at all.
Yeah.
He just seems like a weirdo who is like obsessed with Dracula.
Yeah, and again, this comes from my reading synopses, but I don't think that Renfield is a real estate agent in the book.
Neither is Harker, actually.
Who had
Harker's a lawyer.
Sure, sorry, not agent, lawyer. But, like, in the sense of he's not the one, like, he's not the predecessor.
Yes.
But we meet him here. He's Tom Waits. He's deranged. He's got funny little glasses on. He's in a very stylized asylum calling out to his master.
And, and then, of course, we meet Mina Murray.
We meet Mina. Do we meet Mina before we meet Jonathan?
I think so. My first note is Mina is horny, which is really a little bit redundant because the whole movie is horny.
Yeah, so we have...
yes, because I think they kiss, and then it's like she clearly wants to get a little more whatever.
Right, yeah, no, Winona Rider returns. She's no longer Elisabetta, she is Mina, or is she also Elisabetta? But Mina is a very, is this Victorian at this point? 1897?
Yes, it would be, I think, late Victorian.
Yeah, so she's a Victorian prude who is engaged to Jonathan Harker. Who
is Keanu Reeves.
Who is Keanu Reeves, who very infamously...
sucks.
Kind of... I love him in general.
In this movie, sucks. All respect to our Lord and Savior Keanu, but not here.
This is very infamously a well-known miscast. Apparently Christian Slater was offered the role first, but it went to Reeves because Coppola wanted a matinee idol, as he put it, for the ladies, and cast somebody who had just done Point Break, spread a little thin in all of his projects, can't do a British accent for the life of him, and is so focused on doing that accent that he's kind of forgetting how to act as well. Yeah. And,
I don't think his eyes are, like, focused on anything. Now, to be fair, I mean, you told me that apparently he was quite tired when he did this movie.
Apparently it was hard for him.
Yeah.
And apparently, according to Coppola, he worked really hard on that accent. It just didn't come together, and Coppola kept telling him, like, be a little, like, you can relax, but it didn't work out, and apparently Gary Oldman yelled at him a few times.
I think it actually must have been rather difficult for the actual Brits on set.
Yeah, but, you know, kids trying.
Yeah.
I mean, and look, this is prior to Speed. This is prior to The Matrix.
Yeah.
Like, he rebounds. He's fine.
And look, to be fair, Jonathan Harker is nobody's, like, dashing leading man. You know, he is a little vacant, no matter which way you slice it.
Which is part of why it's funny that Coppola really wanted a matinee idol for this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that, like, oh yeah, Jonathan Harker, the guy who is kind of duped by Dracula and Dracula's castle.
Gets gang raped by 3 lady vampires.
We'll get to that. Yeah, let's make him real sexy.
Yeah.
But
anyway, we travel to Transylvania.
We should also, you know, let's just kind of rattle off some characters. I don't know how much we have to go back and forth, but okay. We have Mina's best friend Lucy, played by Sadie Frost, actual Brit, wearing a big red wig, who is, if Mina is subtextually horny, Lucy is probably the horniest person ever committed to film.
Yes. Textually in the book as well.
Yeah. Although, as I understand it, they ramped it up quite a bit.
Oh, yes, for sure.
But, you know, Mina has an Arabian Nights book with sexy pictures that she's deeply discomfited by, and Lucy is super into.
Yeah.
And Lucy is fending off all of these suitors. And part of why Winona Rider apparently connected with the script was because she liked the romance element, because she wanted to play somebody in an era who was repressed, kind of having a little bit of freedom. So it all kind of came back to that element.
That's cool.
But, yeah.
Well, a little note on the Arabian Nights thing. In the book, Harker actually compares himself while he's talking to Dracula with kind of the situation in Arabian Nights. So I thought it was interesting that was sort of, the sexual subtext is there regardless, but they kind of bring that to the front with that specific book.
That is interesting. And it should be noted that everything that we're seeing, of course, is these big, lavish, color-controlled sets, whether it's interior or exterior.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to do sort of the epistolary novel thing. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay. Where...
Oh, yeah, we should have mentioned that. This is the first iteration that we've seen that actually, honors that part of the book.
Yeah, and it might be the first iteration period, although I'm not 100% sure, because there were some other adaptations that purported to be closer to the book.
Mm-hmm.
Which, side note, apparently 1970, Count Dracula, starring Christopher Lee as Dracula in one of his many Dracula roles, features Klaus Kinski as Renfield prior to him playing Dracula later on. So little fun fact there. But here we have, comparing to the epistolary novel element, we have people are typing, people are recording voice memos,
mm-hmm.
We see text on screen explaining when and where this is happening.
Mm-hmm. Diaries are a big part of it.
Diaries. We have, Dr. Jack Seward runs the weirdest lunatic asylum you'll ever see, which feels like Dante's hell.
Yeah.
And he's recording into a big old gramophone while injecting heroin.
That's also accurate. I don't know about the heroin part, actually, but the gramophone part is.
Yeah, Dr. Jack Seward, played by a young Richard E. Grant.
Yeah, I think he was my favorite character, actually.
He's great.
Yeah. Also actually British.
But yeah, no, the plot kind of kicks off as Keanu Reeves is sent to finish Renfield's work by going off to Transylvania,
mm-hmm.
which he goes by train, and he's watched by giant eyes in the sky, and there's a lovely little effects shot of a train passing in front of a gigantic journal that he's writing in, that the train smoke casts a shadow on that journal because they built a 12-foot book for that.
That's amazing. I wonder where that is.
I hope it still exists.
I do need to say, though, we don't get kind of the most important part of the story.
He doesn't stop at a tavern or an inn or anything like that.
He doesn't even ask the villagers. There are no villagers to listen to.
In fact, the few villagers he does meet at that point in the story kind of have to say to him, since you didn't ask, FYI.
Yeah, right.
He gets out of a carriage at the Borgo Pass, and the locals are like, here, take this cross, please, for God's sake, because you didn't ask.
I was very disappointed. Yeah. I want my don't listen to the locals moment.
I want my perpetually harried, ignored Romanian locals. But there he is now in the Transylvanian night country.
Mm-hmm.
There's wolves. There's weird shit.
There's I don't know what they're called, ghost lights.
Oh yeah, which apparently is from the book.
It is from the book. Well, in which one did they say it was? Walpurgis Night.
That was in the 31 version.
The 31 version. Okay, so in this one, it's actually St. George's Eve. I don't know if there's any connection between those, but it is apparently some kind of legend that, blue light will appear or blue fire will appear when you, over buried treasure just on St. George's Eve.
Which, as I understand it in the book, the weird, creepy driver who is probably actually Dracula takes a moment to, mark that spot with some rocks.
Yeah, or he doesn't, I don't know if he marks it, but he leaves Harker in the carriage a couple times. He's, controlling wolves. It's, high drama.
Yeah. But we do...
which Jonathan Harker is basically and then I didn't know what was happening again.
So here we do have some fun little fire circles, blue fire circles. But just prior to that, we meet the driver, who may or may not be Dracula, but he's got a long arm.
Yeah, and a lot of armor on.
A lot of armor. It's a creepy, gothic, Tim Burton-y kind of look.
Yeah. I actually like that it's not confirmed, because it's not confirmed in the book, but the implication is there.
Yeah. Harker gets in.
Plus, we need another version of Gary Oldman. There's only 14.
I want a runway show of Gary Oldman.
Really, legitimately, that would be amazing.
But yeah, they ride across a matte painting down the very narrow cliffside path to Castle Dracula, which looks a little bit more avant-garde than some of the other versions we've seen.
It looks like kind of a skeleton sitting in a chair.
A little bit, and there's steel beams.
Yeah.
like very kind of industrial steel beams on like a little bridge there. It kind of reminds me of like when I was a kid, there would be like these play sets of like villain lairs, like volcano
What were
lairs.
you
Like,
playing with?
okay, so I have a very distinct memory of being in a dentist office. And there was like a whole big plastic like villain lair with like an action figure. You can walk through it and like you can pull little levers and things move around. And it's entirely impractical and very artificial, but also just like very complete. And that's kind of how this felt to me.
Oh my goodness.
Does anybody listening to this relate to this? Am I crazy?
I didn't have that Playmobil set. I will just say.
Okay. What Playmobil sets did you have?
I think we had the castle.
Was it a castle?
Yeah. Or maybe a pirate ship. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, they weren't for me. They were for my brothers. So.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they should have had the weird villain.
I know, right?
Volcano and shit like that. But here we are in the big weird old maximalist set,
Mm-hmm.
and we meet. Well, it's funny how it plays because this castle is sort of introduced as having just strange physics to it, kind of from the offset. And Coppola said that came from his thought that if you find yourself close to a vampire, then the rules of physics just stop working because they're that weird.
Right.
And that's kind of fun, but it's very showy.
Yeah. I think the first like shadow trickery we see in the movie is like Harker's shadows stop, like it stops obeying him, like as he's crossing the threshold. It kind of it starts doing its own thing. I'm pretty sure that's Harker's shadow and not Dracula's.
Yeah, the shadows are alive in this. And speaking of, we have a wonderful reintroduction to Dracula, where we see a creepy, very Orlok-esque shadow with its claw outstretched, kind of crossing the wall, and we pan over to see that Gary Oldman in his full makeup is already there, and that he has managed to precede his shadow.
Yes. Which
is, I will say, it is cool as hell.
The shadow stuff is pretty cool.
Harker should have noticed. But
I mean, yeah. Harker should have noticed. Should have been like the like subtitle for this movie.
And how would
1990's is Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
The musical.
Nice. Jonathan Harker should have noticed. Oh my goodness.
Okay. How would you describe this is our first look at post-vampire Dracula. How would you describe how he looks?
Dolly Parton. I'm almost not joking. It's like a ruby red robe, and his hair is actually, I'm familiar with the shape that his hair is in. I don't know if this is like intentional, but there was a type of headdress in like, the Tudor times called an attifet, which has that same kind of heart-shaped look to it. I don't know if that was an inspiration, but
you see a heart. I see a big old butt in his head. But yeah, no, that's pretty accurate. This is Coppola basically told Ishioka go weird with this, and his explanation for weird was, I don't want to do the Dracula that we've seen before. I don't want the widow's peak and the dinner jacket and the cape. Like, give me something new. And she did, and she brought a lot of geisha and kabuki influence into this, and it did kind of become a new iconic look. Like people started to view this as an archetypical Dracula for a while.
That's very interesting. I mean, the red mouth and the white face are very also book accurate and accurate to like geisha makeup. So that's an interesting cross parallel there.
Though in the book he has a mustache.
He does have a mustache.
He gains a mustache in this movie, but right now he just has a lot of sort of androgynous age makeup on.
It's interesting. The first time Harker meets him in the book, and I feel bad that like I can only make these comparisons now, but like it's like bros meeting. Like it's not creepy. It's really like Harker's had this like weird journey, and then he like comes in and Dracula is just like so nice and like really he's carrying his luggage for him. By the way, the class thing is like way more prominent in the book. There should be a version of this movie that really highlights the class elements, because I don't think any of them have quite as much so far. But yeah, look, I can imagine it as a very popular Halloween costume in whatever 1993.
My first exposure to it was the Simpsons gag, where in the Treehouse of Horror, where Mr. Burns is Dracula, and he has this hairdress.
We should make it a meme. We should bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's really imaginative and it's really striking, and you know, I wouldn't have thought of it. You know, it's fascinating.
And I was just like, okay, cool. This is what Dracula looks like in this movie. Oh, no. Silly Michal.
Oh, he has a Pokemon evolution.
Oh, yes.
But here he seems like a strange, sad old man.
Mm-hmm. Very old.
Yeah, very old man.
We get the "I never drink wine" line.
Yeah, which by the way comes from the 1931 adaptation. It does not come from the book. But he does invite Jonathan Harker in, and there's a very big point of him crossing the threshold.
Mm-hmm. Joseph Campbell is very excited by this.
It's also kind of an inversion of what we know about vampires, because
it's in the book, though.
Yeah.
He says that same line, or a version of it: "Enter freely of your own will and leave some of the happiness you bring," which is great.
That's a good line.
Yeah.
But sort of culturally, we know vampires can only come in when invited, which we haven't seen.
We have not seen a source for this yet.
But it's funny that here, Jonathan Harker can only enter your vampire's castle if invited.
Mm-hmm.
And polite society, is this a metaphor? Are we reaching? Who the hell knows?
Yeah. I wonder if it's a little bit like the enchantment won't work unless you kind of agree to it, you know?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. It's very... This Dracula has a very elaborate scheme for Harker.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. He's got plans. I mean, I like to think of it that way just because inviting a vampire in to your dwelling is giving the vampire power over you and over the space. Whereas this is sort of having Harker, I'm sorry, this is like English major bullshit of me, but like it's having Harker concede to the power and like leave himself open to the power of the place and the vampire.
Yeah, no, that's true. He is entering enemy territory, right? This is not his home turf.
Yeah. So we have a pretty normal like conversation. I mean, there's a lot of history. Dracula turns out to have hair on his palms like a wolf,
which I think comes from the book also.
It does.
But yeah, this is the scene that we have in every version that we've looked at so far, which is the real estate lawyer, whatever his name may be, sits down for dinner with Dracula, and they talk about proceedings, and Dracula has prepared this big, lovely meal. In a few versions of
There's mysteriously no servants around.
There are no servants. There's just Dracula, and weird-ass shadows and physics-defying rats. But there's a big old painting on the wall of young Dracula that Harker points out and says, "Oh, is that, an ancestor of yours?" And Dracula gets to talk about how he's a descendant of, the Order of the Dragon, Dracula.
This is actually in the book, so I'm assuming it was the inspiration for the historical portion.
Yeah, as I understand it, the book was going to be called The Vampire until Bram Stoker came across
it was apparently
lore.
Like printed in a really crappy version, like the first printing, because it they changed the title so late.
Yeah, but there's we here he's quite literally Vlad the Impaler.
Yes, he is. And he's like, okay, cool. So you're hanging around here for a month. Let everyone know. Write some letters.
Yeah, so they sign their contracts in which Dracula is buying like 50 different places. Which, as I understand it in the book, it's so that he can have a whole bunch of different home bases across town while he's killing people, so he can sneak off at night. But they signed the contract, and has he seen Mina yet at this point?
I think so. Yes, he sees her picture. Also, another interesting change. This is actually a photograph of Mina, not a painting or a miniature.
Well, this is, which I guess I would have to look again because I thought that they were all photographs. Were they not?
No, I think they were all painted, or at least I don't know. I just assumed they were paintings. Huh?
I don't know. I guess I thought that the lockets were all little photos, but I just wasn't looking very closely.
Huh. This is also not a locket. It's just a picture.
Right. It's like on a pendant.
Mm-hmm.
and Dracula is drawn to this woman who looks a lot like his dearly departed Elisabetta.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lovely little moment where Harker is saying, like, oh, yes, I'm so excited that a woman like this loves me and we're going to get married. And, like, in the background, like, Dracula's shadow is, like, trying to strangle him.
Yeah, the ownership. Not in question already.
Why, you little...
Oh, my goodness.
How dare you have this thing that I don't get to have?
Okay, but one very important thing does not happen in these scenes.
He doesn't cut his finger during the...
He does not cut his finger. There is no blood.
There is in a later little moment.
Well, yes, but I'm saying in, like, the introductory, like, hey, how are you? I'm Dracula. Yes, we'll sign the papers. Like, or here's dinner. That doesn't involve any blood.
He doesn't prick his finger. But yeah, so Dracula says, like, hey, just write to your friends saying that you're going to be here for quite some time.
Yep.
For a month. Maybe longer in case you die. I don't know. Just write
who knows? Anything could happen.
Yeah, which Harker's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. He's like, I can't write anything in the letters because he's going to read the letter. It is actually, like, from our perspective today, we know the story very well, and obviously, like, there's a lot of silliness to it, but, like, if you put yourself in that point of view where you have no one else to contact, and you don't understand what the laws of physics are around you, and, like, it can be scary.
Yeah, no, it definitely can be. Meanwhile, back at the ranch.
All right, back at the ranch.
Back at the mansion.
Lucy is busy.
Lucy is trying out every boy she meets.
Yeah, she basically gets proposed to 3 times in the same day, at least in the book, and I think that is what these men are representing, although we don't see that portrayed.
Yeah, she has 3 suitors: Richard E. Grant, Carrie Elwes, and Billy Campbell. Richard E. Grant as Dr. Seward, Carrie Elwes as Lord Arthur Homewood, and Billy Campbell as Quincy P. Morris, the cowboy from Texas. Who, it's such a broad character.
Oh my goodness. There is no nuance there whatsoever.
He has a Crocodile Dundee knife.
It's really...
She makes an innuendo about it, of like, ooh, look how big this knife is.
Because she has a party, basically, and she's just, like, flirting with everyone all at the same time, and Mina's kind of, like, shocked by this.
So all of these actors did spend a lot of time together, like, offset. Mm-hmm. Apparently that was very important for Coppola. So, like, they had a reading around the table, not of the script, but of the book.
That is very cool. I wish there was footage of that.
There is a little bit.
Okay.
It's in the making of documentary on the DVD. They're sitting around the table. They're reading the book. They have all of the book in front of them, which is lovely. And apparently Coppola sent the lads off on adventures, like go on a hot air balloon or go horseback riding, because he wanted them to have camaraderie for when they would actually be on an adventure.
And they are, like, all old war buddies or something. Like, they know each other, and they all kind of, like, commiserate and are congratulating Arthur for being the one to have proposed successfully to Lucy.
Yeah, they would have off camera. They'd have zip zap zop improv exercises, which there's some footage of, which is pretty funny.
There's something very protean about this film, which is, again, funny given that it's only about 30 years old.
It is interesting because, again, like, these aren't characters, right? They are archetypes. They are function. They have functions, but they don't really have
personality.
Like, tell me one thing about Arthur Homewood.
He's blonde.
Tell me one thing about Dr. Seward.
He's probably the most characterized. He is an addict and has a stable job.
Right, but does anything come of the addiction?
No, nothing comes of the addiction.
It's just kind of a thing about him. Quincy Morris, the cowboy,
is American. That's all.
Yeah, and of course the actor is American, but he is not Texan. He is from Charlottesville, and so that accent is hilarious. He wears a nice little tasseled outfit. I think this is one of the very few Dracula movies to have that character.
Yeah, which
is funny because his character, like, has, some pretty important functions in the book.
Yeah, no, the range of, like, the arranging of the cast is very admirable as far as, like, the accuracy to the book and, laying out the different pieces. They're not all employed, but they're certainly there. Also, important to note, until I read the book and watched this version of the movie, I didn't realize, because in the 1931 version, Mina is Mina Seward, and her father is Dr. Seward.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting change.
Right, which came from the stage play. But yeah, no, everything is trying to sort of check off the boxes from the book. It's funny to note that everybody's in this sort of aristocracy. Like everybody's very bougie in this movie.
And Mina is lower class. She is like noted to be poorer. I mean, she doesn't dress like it, but
right. She's a school teacher. I think she's
a school teacher,
which we never see. But she only ever hangs out in Lucy's mansion.
Right, but she's employed, and that's of itself,
pretty big.
Yeah,
Victorian London.
And there is in the book an idea that like she and Jonathan, I don't know why this is like the most interesting part of this to me, but like she and Jonathan like are starting off in a way different place than Lucy and her intended.
Yeah, there's a little mention of that in Nina's voiceover here of sort of the disparity, but it's funny that it never really plays a thematic role, right? They're just really good buds, she and Lucy.
Yeah.
They hang out all the time. As far as I'm concerned, Mina doesn't have a job. Her job is hanging out with
I
Lucy.
guess it's summer.
Yeah,
it is summer actually.
Yeah, no, it is summer. But yeah, and Mina is menaced by the great old shadow of the Count Butthead himself.
Because it's there for some reason,
Well, yeah, well, it's because at this point, right, he set his sights on her, and so we get a little bit of the Nosferatu element here, right? Of the vampire from afar is already kind of starting to influence,
right?
The Mina character without having actually met her yet,
right? I wrote in my notes Emperor from Star Wars, which I'm assuming is a reference to another one of Gary Oldman's looks.
There's a close up of his face that we cut to from the shadow menacing Mina that looks very Emperor from Star Wars. It does. It's cool makeup. It's
no, look, the prosthetics and everything, they are very much in 1992's Francis Ford Coppola and Bram Stoker's Dracula.
It's the musical on ice.
Okay, but then the most important part of the movie happens. Because Renfield is talking to Dr. Seward, and he's like, I want a kitten. And I'm like, we have cat in... the cat is here. Yeah. There is no actual cat. But yeah.
It's a great line. I actually have the quote out here, because he's having a little back and forth with Seward, where Seward is talking about, like, the flies that Renfield's eating. And Seward is kind of, like, egging him on of, like, you want something a little bigger? What about sparrows? And Renfield says, oh yes, did you say sparrows? And Seward says, something larger perhaps? And Renfield says, oh yes, a kitten. I beg you. A little sleek, a playful kitten. Something I can teach. Something I could feed. No one would refuse me a kitten. And Seward says, wouldn't you prefer a cat? And Renfield says, oh yes, a big cat. My salvation depends upon it. And Tom Waits is having too much fun.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I can't get over how the people who work in this institution have cages on their
head.
head.
They do.
Was that real, or was that just...
I have no idea, but I'm going to assume it's based on something, because if you think about it, it's a good way of stopping your eyes from getting gouged out.
This is true, but it is so funny to look at.
It is very funny. Because also, you see the cages, and for some reason you're like, oh, those are the inmates. They're not. Oh, they're the orderlies.
Yeah. No, it is the most out there version of the asylum that we've seen so far.
Yeah.
Right. It's
full on bedlam.
It's kind of the opposite of the one from the 1931 film.
Yeah.
Which is basically a hotel you can come and go as you
please.
But here it's like just fully hell.
Yeah.
But by the way, this movie is not Universal. Produced by American Zoetrope and Osiris Films, it's distributed by Columbia. Dracula is very much public domain, but it does mean that certain elements that were invented for the Universal movie or first done by Universal
belong to them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we're not gonna get the famous Dracula cape, for example. Like, everything has to look different.
Right.
Which, spurs some interesting ideas.
Yeah, for sure. So then we're back at Castle Dracula, and we do get our blood scene.
Yeah.
And it's the grossest we've seen so far.
Yeah. Harker is shaving, and Dracula comes in and gets real mad about the mirror. The mirror explodes.
So he calls it a trinket of deceit.
And Harker cuts his throat a little bit, just a tiny bit. Dracula takes a little taste and then turns away from him.
He takes a taste from the blade.
He licks the blade and then we get a nice little close-up as he turns away from Harker, so Harker doesn't see him go just like full like shudders of delight about it.
It's really visceral.
It's pretty upsetting.
Also, there's just something about like putting a razor blade to your tongue that is specifically like very upsetting.
Yeah, and at this point, Harker is like kind of starting to be a little bit upset with the Count. Like
it's penetrating even that noggin.
Yeah, I mean, it should be noted that they had a little blow up in the prior scene where Harker like kind of makes a little bit of a laughing noise about the whole like lineage of Dracula thing, and Dracula just fully pulls down a sword and like swings it at him and says, "It's no laughing matter." So they're in that kind of back and forth now.
Yes, and that's also in the book. It is a little bit like that, and you can kind of view it almost as like a manipulation technique, of like hot and cold very like distinctly, because there are times when even as things are getting weirder, Harker will be like, yeah, we sat up talking all night and he was super interesting and learned a lot.
There's definitely a version to be made that plays into the whole like abusive toxic relationship element.
Oh yes.
It's not quite what this is. This is very much like I feel
like the ultimate end point of this is actually not Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. It's like whatever we come up with after. Probably.
But yeah, there's some argument back and forth here. There's a crucifix on Harker's neck, which upsets Dracula. He's like, this isn't like this isn't London. This is Transylvania. We don't fuck with your Christianity here.
Which is funny because part of Harker's like hesitance. He doesn't come with that crucifix. He's obviously been given it by a local, and I guess he did listen to the local in that sense. But like in the book, he's very. I apologize that this is like the in the book episode, but like,
well, this is Bram Stoker. This is Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's.
Yes, exactly. That was true from 1992.
On ice.
On fire. but like. He actually has a whole thing about whether he should take it or not, because according to, English Protestantism, that crosses idolatry.
Right. Interesting.
So for Dracula, who we obviously saw had a significant relationship with crosses and whatever when he was right with God or whatever, to be like, oh no, that's wrong is a very interesting twist on things.
Dracula has the Children of the Night line.
He does.
What sweet music they make, which... Yes. Really pisses off Harker. Like music, those animals. that delivery is amazing. The walls are literally moving in the scene, which is actually pretty dang cool. Dracula kind of jumps out the window and sort of crawls around on walls and stuff, and Harker's kind of getting a sense of maybe something's weird here.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of trick photography.
It's like I mean, this is the 90s, so it's like that, you've got mail like loading sound.
buffering. But yeah, there's some fun little trick photography of Gary Oldman with his long red robe crawling around on a set that's parallel to the floor, but it's shot so that it looks like he's crawling down a wall, but his cape is trailing up behind him. It's pretty cool. But Jonathan starts to maybe like get a little weirded out, so he starts to explore.
And he finds some fellow guests.
Yeah, he goes downstairs. There's some rats running upside down on the beams. There's
which is such a bizarre. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's the physics are funky here. There's like he has something that's like dripping upward also. Like that's dripping upward. I think. By the way, going back a little bit, I think that Nina's picture in Dracula's hand starts to bleed.
It gets covered by either shadow or ink or something.
Yeah. But yeah, so now we meet the brides, featuring the cinematic debut of Monica Bellucci in a pretty thankless role, I gotta say. But
yeah, it's not the most nuanced.
Yeah, we're suddenly in a sexy
basically a harem. Yeah, I mean it's designed like that, which I mean, fair enough. This is Transylvania is very close to Turkey. I believe he was fighting the Turks at the beginning.
Yeah. There's a vanity mirror on the ceiling, which is pretty funny.
And ironic.
And there's all sorts of colorful blankets across the floor, and Harker is hypnotized.
And the women, like, come out of the floor.
They, like, rise up through everything, and they're all over him, and they're all naked, and they're all biting him, and pretty sure they bite his dick off. It's,
it definitely looks like they do.
Fun little behind the scenes story. Coppola did not want to be. He felt uncomfortable asking these actresses to get undressed for the scene because it just uncomfortable for him. So he asked his son, who was on set as the makeup art, as the effects artist rather, his son as the special effects artist, to ask them instead. But he got cold feet, and so we had to ask another crew member. So just imagine being these actresses where it's like, why don't they kind of just tell us to take the clothes off?
Yeah.
Like, we signed up for this. It's like all these like blushing guys, like
not an intimacy coordinator.
Yeah, which is funny because like if you watch this movie without like reading those kinds of behind the scenes stuff, Coppola seems pretty damn horny.
He does. Yes, it's a very horny movie.
It's a very horny movie, but they're all over Keanu for like 5 whole minutes.
Yeah, his cross evaporates on his chest.
Yeah, it like melts. It's like they had a cross made out of wax that they like pointed a
heat gun at. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like sped up the footage.
It's super weird. Now, why Dracula himself couldn't do that, I don't know.
Because there's not 3 of them.
Oh.
And also because he's not hot.
That I will not argue with.
But yeah, Dracula like flies in the scene, like literally flies in a fit of rage, basically telling him, "This man is mine." It's like the over the top version of the 1931 scene, and these brides are upset because they never get any affection from Dracula. Dracula's like, "Well, I am capable of love. It's just not for you."
Yeah.
And they're like,
they're starved of something.
They're starved of something. And he's like, if you're starved of something, I can feed you with something. And he brings out a baby.
Yes.
And that's when Harker starts to get actually upset.
Yeah, he loses it.
There's a lot going on. I mean, this is actually like the first scene in the movie where I thought they actually framed Dracula to look kind of menacing. Like that kind of slow push in on his kind of backlit face as he's kind of grinning in that kind of way.
Yeah.
With the music rising like that. Like that actually was like, okay, this guy is a force to be reckoned with.
All right, we're at sea, and we are finally on a ship called the Demeter.
Yeah, it's called the Demeter. And fun fact, the screenwriter of Last Voyage of the Demeter, Braggy Shute Jr., was on set for this movie. He had a friend on the production. He got to see the model of the Demeter and thought, wouldn't it be fun if there was an entire movie set in that chapter? And that's when he wrote that script, and it took decades to get made.
That is hilarious.
Ultimately, it did get made in a form that's a little different than what he wrote, but hey, that's how it goes. But yeah, so the Demeter, and Dracula is he's been loaded up by his servants. He has.
They're not coffins though.
Right.
They're just kind of big old crates.
He has one coffin for himself, and he has a bunch of boxes of dirt because he
experimental earth.
Which kind of makes more sense, right? If you're delivering dirt, they don't all have to be coffins.
That's true.
They don't all have to be, but you just have to be willing to transfer them.
That is true.
So yeah, they're on the boat. He's been loaded up by. He's got these sort of I guess mercenaries, like local. Like the movie.
It looks like the local people are kind of in his employ.
The movie keeps calling them gypsies.
Yeah.
Which I figure is still not the term.
Yeah.
But they load his stuff up, and Harker realizes that he's locked up and can't go anywhere.
Yep.
We're intercutting. There's a lot of intercutting that happens now between the boat and Lucy and Mina. Lucy and Mina are running around having fun.
Yeah.
Because it's raining, because there's a storm coming in, and they're having a lot of fun, and they're like kind of making out a little bit too.
Yep.
But we're coming back and forth with the boat, and he's transforming in like an amniotic sac in the boat, and there's a voiceover, which also Anthony Hopkins, of the captain being like, "There's something weird on this boat," which turns out to be Dracula in his wolfy form, wolf bat monster form, full size wolf bat monster.
This movie, we should say, is not at all wed to the bat thing.
Yeah, this is
much more wolf.
I think this is the first Dracula movie to show Dracula kind of turning into not like a tiny little bat, but a large humanoid bat.
Yeah.
Like there's been
a werewolf.
Yeah.
It's very wolf forward, in my opinion.
It's very wolf forward. I mean, he turns to mist at one point, but there were other movies at the time with vampires where they would sort of switch between human faces and funky faces.
Mm-hmm.
You know, kind of like Buffy the Vampire-ish kind of faces, like the Lost Boys, for example. But this is the first one where it's like he turns into a bat. It's just a full-size bat, human bat. But yeah, he's on the boat. He turns into a werewolf.
He's a man bat.
We're intercutting with... we got the lunatics in the asylum are all rioting during the storm, and Renfield's like, the master's coming. And
it's a very strong sense that he already has a tremendous amount of influence in England.
Yeah, it feels big. And straight off the boat, he's already hypnotizing Lucy to wandering through a maze, a hedge maze. I love they have a hedge maze.
Yeah. I mean, you're not rich unless you have a hedge maze.
Hedge maze in a storm. In
a red negligee.
Yeah. Mina follows to see full-on Dracula rape.
Yep. Lucy is actively copulating with a werewolf.
Well, the werewolf is fully copulating with...
That's true.
Lucy.
That's true. In the rain.
Yeah, which, by the way, a little funny behind-the-scenes thing, Coppola told Gary Oldman that he should say sexy things in her ear while doing that to get the appropriate response, because she's supposed to be like hypnotized, right? And according to Sadie Frost, Gary Oldman said a whole lot of things that were, quote, unrepeatable.
Okay. You know what? I feel like that's actually worse than asking actresses who have already been contracted to take their clothes off
Tiny bit. There is a bit of behind the scenes lore that at one point Coppola that Winona Rider said that Coppola had asked Gary Oldman to be I forget if no. I think I might be getting this wrong, but I think that the lore is that Winona Rider said that Coppola had asked Anthony Hopkins to slap her at one point to try to get more of a crying reaction, and he said no. And Coppola came out and said, that's a lie. I just told them to say harsh things to her to get a reaction. To which Winona Rider said, yeah, that sounds about right, actually. So I don't know what actually happened. There's a whole lot of method.
It was the 90s.
Going on with the director and the actors. And, it's funny because, with the exception of the Oldman Rider dynamic, which was awkward, and the fact that Oldman was kind of apart from everybody else on that set seems to have really enjoyed working with each other.
Yeah.
Which, thank God, but, you don't... you gotta... intimacy coordinators are important.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so there's he's Dracula's off the boat. He's incredibly horny off the spot. Mm-hmm. First lady he sees. And then he looks up and sees Mina and sees her vascular system and says, no, do not see me. And so she doesn't.
She doesn't. Then she just sees Lucy copulating alone.
Yeah. And Lucy, by the way, fully red dress in this scene.
Mm-hmm.
It's very...
the red negligee soaked.
It feels a little bit like a movie that punishes female sexuality.
It does a little bit, especially because I want to talk about this for a second. When Mina snaps Lucy out of it, Lucy is really upset. Very much played post-rape. I was not in control. She's in pain. It's maybe one of the most upsetting moments in the movie.
Yeah. And it's not really played as upsetting in that way. It's upsetting to us because we know. But it's sort of played
it has no consequences. But in the moment, it's very evident.
It plays as spectacle, right? It plays as... it feels like Lucy had to be horny as a character for this to be fitting, which feels weird.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the purpose that her character seems to serve in the book. Also, she's,
A strumpet.
She's not a strumpet. But she, there is an idea that she is more promiscuous than Mina.
Yeah, she certainly is in the movie.
Yeah. I think that's fair to say. And it is a little bit well, what did you expect? Did you not think you would get raped by a werewolf?
Yeah.
In your back garden?
And the sort of the virtuous one is kind of virginal.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a lot of age-old horror movie tropes that have been...
Oh, Mina is such a final girl.
She is. She isn't, because she goes through some transformations in other ways too, which is interesting.
Okay.
Because Final Girls, I feel we kind of associate with agency,
Mm-hmm.
and as we'll see, she kind of loses hers for a while.
Right.
But it is interesting because it kind of does come back to that. But we'll get that'll be an interesting conversation to have, because one of the things we've been tracking is how much agency does the Ellen, Mina, sometimes Lucy character have in these movies.
Right. All right. So then we get probably the most of actual Gary Oldman that we see in the movie, because he's in London and he is hot now with a mustache.
He is
and a top hat.
He has a mustache. He has long hair, but it's shaved up a little bit, so he has a tall forehead. It's kind of a rock starish kind of a look, a little steampunky.
I didn't find it appealing, but I don't judge.
It's not my either. It's interesting because we have some voiceover from Van Helsing we haven't met yet, explaining that actually sunlight doesn't kill vampires. And that's given to us just in time to see a vampire walking around in sunlight. Which
is funny, because I feel like you could also just be like, no, it's just the lights from the stage.
Right, we're on a soundstage, city street during the day. It's a very hand cranked shot for a moment that feels like early cinema, as we hear a newsboy handing out newspapers saying, "See the cinematograph," the early film Edison's magic thingy. And Dracula takes a newspaper. We see he has a reflection, which is a fun little effect. He sees Mina across the street, who is dressed like the protagonist, because now she has a very brightly green outfit that everybody else is kind of drab.
And guess what's opposite the color wheel from green?
Ooh.
Is it red? It is red.
She's the anti-Dracula, but also the anti-Lucy.
And also, together they make Christmas.
Christmas. Tonight is Christmas Eve as we were recording this.
It is.
But Dracula sees her and says, "See me now." Now see me.
And I actually found this very frustrating, because he basically badgers her into paying attention to him and stalks her down the street. He does that thing where he shouldn't be able to be there, but he is, and she gets freaked out by it. And she ends up apologizing to him. And I'm not going to say that the movie plays it like, oh, Mina should be apologizing to him, but it's not notable. And to me, that was just extremely oh yeah, you got kidnapped and murdered because you didn't want to be rude,
Yeah, I mean, you didn't find him charming and sexy, kind of doing his weird little nagging thing, but he's tall, dark, and handsome, and has an accent, and he's handsome's debatable, but he has an accent, and I am Prince Vlad, and I don't know the ways of your town, so I apologize if I've been uncomfy. But
she claims to be married, and then he backs off immediately, and then she goes back to him.
Their dynamic is very strange.
It's odd.
Lucy is having some hard times.
Yeah. Yep. She is asking Dr. Seward for help, also flirting with him somewhat, and she says that she is changing.
Yeah, and so Dr. Seward decides to call in
a metaphysician.
His old buddy.
Yeah. A little different from Paracelsian, but almost the same number of syllables.
Van Helsing, played by Anthony Hopkins.
I was like, is that Anthony Hopkins?
With a wig and a scar and a Dutch accent, because it's Van Helsing.
Oh my god. This is... At first I was really happy to see him. Because we don't get movies that Anthony Hopkins is happy to be in anymore. And we just don't. We don't. He just does all these extremely big budget things where he just has to stand there and deliver a couple of lines and growl. And he's very active in this movie.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I love his Van Helsing. I think his character makes no sense half the time and goes and crosses some real lines that make no narrative sense. Yeah. But his performance is so fun.
It is very fun. I was like, oh, okay, so I think I was expecting an adult in the room, and it's not Van Helsing.
Van Helsing is a lunatic in this movie.
Yeah.
He starts off, we see him, he's teaching a class, of surgeons in that sort of surgery theater, making jokes about civilization and syphilization, because he's talking about syphilis.
Because sex.
Yeah, because bloodborne illnesses. Which, by the way, this is a movie that has a lot of shots of blood cells in it, and it feels notable.
Everything we've watched so far has had some kind of stock.
This is true, but here we have blood cells and we have discussion of bloodborne illnesses, and it's interesting that it's sort of coming out in the sort of the the heels of the AIDS epidemic.
That is interesting.
And I wonder how much of that was subconscious, how much of that was intentional, how much of that was a coincidence. But I could imagine audiences feeling really uncomfortable and not knowing why.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, Van Helsing is a man who does not know social cues and is way too excited all the time, and he's an actual crazy person. It's fantastic.
Yeah. If the Van Helsing in Herzog's version was like useless, this guy is not useless, but you almost wish he was.
Yeah, and also like if we're going to compare him to the Edward Van Sloan version of him from the 1931 movie, that character really is like the father in the room, the father figure who knows what he's doing. Here we have a man who's like, begrudgingly, we're gonna let you touch our bodies, but we kind of also want to arrest you.
Yeah, exactly. He also says "yeah" so many times, and it's just like, okay, I get it. You're Dutch. I get it.
There is something kind of fun about a movie full of Americans and Canadians doing some really tough British accents. And then you have a British actor doing a really poor Dutch accent.
Yeah. Anyway, Lucy has some big bite marks on her neck. Van Helsing delivers the line, I believe. Was it Van Helsing or was this? It sounds like.
Well, he gives a discussion because when they first enter the room, there's kind of a shadow that leaves the room that had been biting Lucy. That kind of drips some blood on the floor. They check her out. They do a real quick blood transfusion.
Yeah.
He's like, this woman needs a blood transfusion right now. He has no interest in asking Dr. Seward.
No, he does ask Seward, but then
no, he doesn't ask Dr. Seward what his blood type is.
Oh! I'm sorry. I should have let you finish.
Which I think is so funny because he's like, "Don't worry, I'm a doctor. Do you have blood in you? I don't care. Cool."
Well, this is where the line comes in. There are no limits to science, and it's like, oh, there definitively are, man.
Well, Holmwood comes in, and he's like, "What's the meaning of this? I am the current fiancé, and I want to know what's going on.
If anyone's exchanging fluids with my fiancé, it's going to be me."
And by the way, her tits are out the entire scene.
Yes, they are.
And nobody really thinks to cover her up.
No.
But they both do a blood transfusion into her because later they talk about like, man, I don't know how you can fit all that blood in a single person, which makes me think like, you're not taking all of their blood.
Yeah, right.
But Van Helsing kind of talks them into the idea that maybe there are vampires because, she was lacking blood, but where did the blood go? And there's these, she's got these bite marks and look, I've hypnotized you and suddenly I'm across the field and now I'm behind a bush and therefore magic is possible. And so maybe you should consider that maybe this is a vampire, and they're kind of down with it.
Yeah, I think this is also a movie where science and magic are not actually at odds. They kind of work hand in hand.
Which feels very 1931.
Yes.
It's funny that they make a very big point that Van Helsing is a scientist who teaches medicine, because the first shot where he shows up at the house feels very deliberately like the shot from The Exorcist, of the Exorcist arriving at the house with the light from the window, which it's got to be intentional. Like that's iconography at this point, and Van Helsing in this movie is basically an exorcist.
That is true.
He even at one point says, "The power of Christ compels you," which is not subtle. But the woman is in distress, and the guys are down to do what's necessary to stuff and things.
Anyway, meanwhile, the flirting continues.
Yeah, at the motion picture show.
Yes, exactly. And
were they showing like porn?
They are showing porn.
Black and white silent porn?
I think there are children there.
Yeah, because there's also like shadow puppets.
This is such a weird movie.
There's shadow puppets of Vlad the Impaler conquering the Turks at one point there, but it's a very movie.
Yeah. You know what? It feels a little bit like Herzog's version was like dream logic. This is kind of like
fever dream
logic. Yeah, exactly. Like everyone on set was a little sick, and this just happened.
Fun fact.
Obviously, it didn't. They worked very hard on it, but
right. I mean, it's very visually controlled. Like like before the movie was shot, Coppola commissioned artists to draw out every shot so that he could put together an animatic and design the.
Does that still exist?
I wish. There's a. He would play that for executives and play that for a crew. It would be like, this is what we're going for. Costume designers, this is what we're going for. He would include little clips from Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast from 1946 in there, which the influence of that is all over this movie. But this is a movie that, for me, the most successful thing that it does are its transitions.
Mm-hmm.
Just some really fun transitions. Like, we're going from the bite marks in Lucy's neck to the eyes of a wolf.
Yeah.
You know, we're going from, like, the sun to the mouth of a tunnel. The match cuts are wild in this.
They are.
But yeah, no, the Mina and Count Dracula are on a date.
Except he's being very rough with her. Like, very physically rough.
It's not a good date.
No.
He says the line that convinced Gary Oldman to do the movie, because Gary Oldman was like, it's not like it hasn't been on my bucket list to be Dracula,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to work with Coppola. Who doesn't want to work with Coppola? And also, I want to say the line,
I have crossed oceans of time to find you.
I have crossed oceans of time to find you, which is
admittedly a good line.
It's a good line. It's not, this entire subplot is not from the book.
No.
But the date is salvaged by a
by a puppy.
By a puppy. A wolf has escaped the zoo, and everybody's panicking. But Dracula can talk to the wolf and pet the wolf, and he says there's much we can learn from beasts. And Mina is smitten
and
with.
We have a scene of heavy petting. It is.
Okay.
They're both petting that thing like.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. There's heavier petting to come.
Anyway, we kind of go from there into suddenly they're like actually involved.
Yeah, she's basically forgotten about her betrothed. And
yeah.
They're drinking absinthe, and there's a lot of discussion about the absinthe, and she seems to have a lot of memories about Transylvania, because is she the reincarnated suicide wife of Count Dracula?
Maybe.
Is she? And she cries some tears, but he holds them in his hand and they're diamonds, which apparently comes from Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast.
Oh.
Which explains that.
Ah.
It's a fun little moment. I don't know why, canonically, textually, why somebody would say, like, I defy God, I will no longer serve God, and God's like, you win all of the powers. You can turn tears into diamonds. You can transform into anything. You have magic. You know, it's a pretty funny thing to think about, but it's cool.
Yeah. It's because it's not the eternal reward.
Although it's pretty eternal at this point.
Yeah. Honestly, it is a little hard to recap this because it cuts so much.
It's easy to get a little motion sick from this movie.
Yeah.
It moves very fast, and the style changes pretty frequently.
Yeah. So I think at some point, while all this is happening, Jonathan escapes.
Yeah.
Castle Dracula. But tragically, he does not use a bedsheet rope.
It's very sad. And I get it. I guess he doesn't have a bed in this. He's just sort of being like held in a cross pose by the brides.
Yeah.
One of them's Medusa. And they're just kind of like sucking on him, but like not in a fun way.
Yeah.
And he climbs out a window and is sort of standing on the ledge, but then he falls sideways because physics are funny, and he falls into the lake and he escapes. And
he gets thee to a nunnery. Yeah. Which, of course, the lights are shining through the windows, and the windows are shaped like crosses. So, more of that iconography.
I'm just looking at your notes, and I'm just sort of like, we have lost the plot a little bit.
That's fine. So has Francis. Francis Ford Coppola's 1992's President of Dracula. Anyway.
The movie is frenetic at this point.
Yes. Mina has met Van Helsing.
Yeah, well, Mina...
Because she's staying with Lucy.
Right, I mean, so Lucy's super sick.
Yeah.
And at this point, has Mina finally heard back from Harker?
I think that is soon. Or, like, around now.
Yeah, so Mina goes to see Lucy... Wait, it would be now, because the reason she's seeing Lucy is because she has big news to tell her.
Oh, that's correct. You're right.
That Harker has asked her...
Should we just start that over again?
Nah, let's just keep going.
Okay.
Fuck it. You know what?
It's going to be a 2-hour episode, but you know what? It's all good.
We can... You know what? They can pause and go to the bathroom. but Mina has heard from Harker, and Harker says, come to visit me and get married to me in Romania.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, ooh, that's a good idea. I should do that. I'm happy he's alive. I'm going to have to figure out a way to break it to the Count. But first she wants to tell Lucy, but before she can tell Lucy, she bumps to Van Helsing.
And Van Helsing... It's hard to even verbalize because there's a lot of weird sexual stuff that happens in the movie, but this might be the weirdest. They come face to face and he sniffs her. And it's hard to convey a sniff on camera. Okay? But this is so clear. And so okay, you go now.
Oh, I've been going. Keep saying
it's bizarre. It's actually bizarre. You said that there was some kind of explanation behind it.
Yeah. So he sniffs her and he dances with her a little bit and gives her some warning about how she's beautiful and therefore in danger.
Yeah.
And so Coppola sort of famously is a little improvisational.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this has usually worked to his benefit. You know, he'll throw out entire scenes of his scripts and just do something on the spot that just feels right to him. And he'll let actors kind of bring their own thing in. And I mean, all of the Colonel Kurtz stuff in Apocalypse Now is not from the script. Like it's all Brando improving and just them feeling something out and finding it in the edit. And Coppola got on really well with the actors in this movie, and Anthony Hopkins had a fun little idea during the rehearsal that he should sniff Mina and then dance with her, and they rehearsed that, and Coppola put that in the script, and that's in the movie, and in the behind-the-scenes documentary, everybody's like, and it's so much more fun now, and I'm watching this and I'm like, what?
Sometimes the ideas that seem the funnest while you're making the thing, no. I have personal experience with this. It doesn't always work out the way you want it to.
But yeah, Mina goes inside, goes to Lucy, who looks like she's literally dying, and says, hey, good news, I'm getting married. And they have a nice little back and forth.
It is very sweet.
But also, Lucy has...
Well, because Mina doesn't want to go, because she doesn't want to leave Lucy. Yeah. Lucy tells her to go.
Lucy gives her blessing, but also she gives everybody else the blessing to get rid of that garlic.
Mm-hmm.
And she wants to kiss Seward, which is Seward number 2, I think, in the sequence of 3.
Yes.
But then she has some fangs growing, and they have to pull Seward away, and she's got like secondary fangs, and I think this is the movie that popularized that idea of the retractable extra fangs.
Okay. Yeah, they're very clearly like over her actual incisors, and I think you see that a couple times with Oldman too.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Is this our first garlic reference? It's not, right?
I think it might be.
Oh, garlic has entered the chat.
Garlic, because we've had Wolfsbane. So, to be clear, at this point in cinema history, there has been garlic in Dracula movies.
Right, of course.
We just haven't watched them.
Yeah.
It's funny watching the behind the scenes of this movie and the interview with the writer and how he wanted to kind of make Dracula important again, and kind of the examples they give, because at this point, Dracula has kind of been kitschized for sort of a second time, right? Because after the Universal cycle, he's kind of a joke, but then the Hammer movies come in and make him scary again, but then he becomes kind of a joke again. And the movie that they reference in the behind-the-scenes documentary is Dracula versus Billy the Kid, which I think is John Carradine as Dracula. Not his first time playing Dracula, he's played him a bunch. And in interviews, he has said that that's the only movie he regrets making, which he has like hundreds of movies on his resume, and a lot of them are not good. But that's the one he regrets.
Wow.
And anyway, but all this is to say garlic. Yeah.
So anyway, Mina goes to Harker. She's on a boat. She breaks up with Dracula, but she feels terrible. It is clear where her true affections lie. Van Helsing has figured out that it's Dracula and is like having an orgasm over it. He's so happy.
He's reading a book about Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah. I wrote horses. I don't know why.
Horses. I guess there are.
I think
horses.
There's more horses.
Yeah, I mean, animal-wise, this movie's doing pretty decent.
Yeah, this is true. And then Mina and Jonathan get married.
And by the way, because they filmed it in an actual church with an actual minister, Winona Rider and Keanu Reeves religiously actually got married.
Oh,
they kind of realized this a little bit after the fact.
That's hilarious.
But they're like, oh, I guess in the eyes of God, we're married. And sometimes Winona would text Keanu like, "Hello, husband," like, to this day. Apparently, that's a little thing. They just kind of actually got married.
Oh my gosh! Whichever one of them dies first is going to be survived. May they both live very long lives.
What was your first wedding like? Oh well, we were both doing a British accent.
We were both miserable.
We were both. He had powder in his hair.
Yeah. They've decided to turn Harker's hair like varying shades of gray and white. And then he just used baby powder.
It's so high school play.
Yeah, it really, really is.
For a movie that did deserve an Oscar for its costumes and makeup, this was a weird choice.
Yeah. Mina also, I mean, it's worth saying, she looks miserable during this wedding. She looks like she's about to run away.
Well, yeah, because they're like having a Godfather montage, right? Like famously in The Godfather, there's that montage where they're baptizing the baby and we're intercutting with all of Michael Corleone's enemies being taken out.
Mm-hmm.
And here we're doing the same thing. They're getting married while Dracula, who's very sad and his face has melted.
Yes.
And and he calls the winds, which blow out his hundreds of candles, and also I guess blow out Van Helsing's hundreds of candles. They had a lot of candles.
Of course.
You can't read with only one candle. You need hundreds of candles.
The more candles, the better, as far as books are concerned.
Yeah. So like Dracula has this prosthetic on, which actually like got a reaction out of you, I remember, where it's sort of like kind of his old man makeup, but it's like formless.
Yeah.
And he yells "Wins!" and suddenly he's flying as a Batman, and
yep.
He goes out to Lucy, and Quincy's there to. Well, we have some.
Is this where we get full-size Batman? Man-Bat?
Not quite.
Okay.
But we do have other weirdness. So, like, we have Dracula Vision, which is his perspective, which Roman Coppola created with by just taking a whole lot of photos in succession. That's why it feels so stuttery.
Oh, interesting.
Special effects magic, analog magic. Dracula goes to the window. He looks like old man Dracula. He curses Lucy to an undying eternal hell, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
He turns into a literal wolf.
Yeah.
Leaps through the window, knocks Quincy away, who's been sitting there with a gun, and basically explodes Lucy. Like, he bites her and there's blood everywhere.
Yeah. I think this might have been the point in the movie where I knew what movie I was watching.
There's fully a wide shot where they just blood cannon the room.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he's mad about his quasi girlfriend, so he takes it out on Lucy, and Lucy dies.
Lucy dies
Forever.
This particular ocean of time is more like a stream. So Lucy's in her coffin.
Oh, you have the quote there.
Yeah.
I condemn you to living death, to eternal hunger for living blood.
Yes. I take decent notes. And also while this is going on, Jonathan and Mina are drinking like the wedding wine. It's all very, I do like this intercutting, as ridiculous as it is. But so Lucy is in her coffin, being mourned over.
Dressed like Pagliacci.
Yeah, oh my God. And
big frilly white outfit.
Yeah.
Finally, she's wearing white instead of red.
It's true.
Because she's been drained of her blood and of her seductiveness.
Yeah. Oh no, that's still there. But like, Van Helsing calls Seward over, and he's like, in a not whisper, like, could you get the postmortem knives? And he's like, why? Like an autopsy on Lucy? Like, why? He's like, no, I don't want to do an autopsy. I just want to cut off her head and drive a stake through her body.
I love Van Helsing. I'm sorry. He's
okay, he does say in the book. I looked it up. He does. He does, in fact, say almost that exact thing in the book.
I just love how tactless he is in this.
Seward, poor man, is horrified.
Yeah.
But not for long.
But not for long. He gets kind of pulled into it. Yep.
And then Jonathan and Mina are back in London. God, this movie bounces between, like, there's so much travel in this movie. Like, this is such a travel movie. He sees Dracula in the street and freaks out. Meanwhile, Mina is talking.
He's turned young.
Yes, exactly. We're back to mustache version. Mina has, now that she is married, has figured out the nature of her feelings for Dracula. So then they decide to basically take out undead Lucy.
There's a great line that Van Helsing has where they're all getting in a in a carriage to go to the mausoleum, with Seward and Homewood and etc. And Van Helsing just kind of realizes he's hungry and he's just like bouncing up and down and is excited, and he just calls out to Dr. Seward and says, "Jack, I starve, feed me." He's just living his best life.
He really is. They do defeat Lucy. She has a little kid with her because she's the bloofer lady, and I mean, I don't think that's mentioned specifically, but she has a child. They do rescue the child. And it's so fun. It's like Lucy's face isn't even white at this point. It's like beyond white.
She looks like a mime. I mean, she's in this big frilly outfit that feels like a clown costume mixed with like French aristocracy. They're in this big this marble mausoleum. Okay, so I'm just checking the Wikipedia to remind myself which characters were in this. So it's Van Helsing, Homewood, Seward, and Quincy. And they're like, "Oh, she's not in the coffin. But where is she? She is coming down the stairs holding a crying child," which, as I understand it, is from the book. And as I also understand it, that kid was not having a good time on set.
No.
That kid on set, once they're like, action, they put her in Lucy's hands, Sadie Frost, she started freaking out. And so she actually got really scared. And then they had to do another take. And apparently it took a lot of sweet talking from Sadie Frost and Francis Ford Coppola to convince this kid to get back in her arms to do another take.
Oh my goodness.
Because this kid was straight up having a bad time.
That's so sad. Oh man.
And then they filmed Lucy's movements backwards to make her seem more ethereal.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of insect-like. She like gets into her coffin.
She crawls into her coffin backwards and goes to sleep because Van Helsing is compelling her with power of Christ. And in a very exorcisty kind of way, Lucy spews blood all over his face.
Yep.
It might as well have been pea soup.
Yep.
But stab, chop, slice.
Yeah. And they do get rid of Lucy. Van Helsing could not be happier. Like, really could not. I mean, this is the best day of his life.
Yeah, he's having a great time. And they're all having... We have a great little match cut from, like, the decapitation to, like, carving up like a roast.
Oh, yes. And this is where Van Helsing is talking to Mina and Jonathan.
Yeah. It's like, how did... how did she die? Did she suffer? It's like, well, once we drove a stake through her heart and chopped off her head, then she wasn't suffering anymore.
It's actually very interesting in the book because in the book, like, this sequence of events happens, and then like it's a very dramatic moment where they get Arthur to stake her, right? And then Helsing's like, "I know this sucks, it's gonna suck, but like, you're saving her soul, and you're gonna see after, you'll have so much joy, it'll be so much better, whatever." So they do it. It's very dramatic. She's like writhing, and then finally, like, I guess she's unvamped, and like she looks sick again, but they're all happy because she looks like actual Lucy, not vampire Lucy. And then they send Arthur and Quincy out, and Seward is just quickly like, "Yeah, so then we sawed off the stake so that it was like just really embedded in her body and cut her."
Yeah, as one does.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to saw it off so you can close the coffin again.
Yeah, right.
Otherwise, it's just kind of sticking out.
And look, if someone can just pull it out, I mean, what's the point?
But yeah, no, they're talking with Mina and Jonathan, and he's got that powder in his hair, and he says, "I know where the bastard sleeps. Well, I brought him there myself."
He's also like,
I sold him the place.
Van Helsing is like, "Hey, when you were having your infidelities,"
which Mina's like, I'm good with it.
She's smiling the whole time. She's like, "Oh," he's like, "Did you drink their blood?" And he's like, "No, I don't think so." And Mina's like, "Oh, good baby, oh."
But I love the timing of it because Van Helsing asked that question of like, "Did you drink from their blood?" And like Keanu just stares at him and says, "No."
Wait, was that an option?
I mean, look, they both had their infidelities, right?
Yeah,
so
true.
I guess they're even now.
True. Genuinely, I mean, the consent is questionable on both ends, but I think Mina's is probably slightly more consensual. Jonathan's just being tortured by 3 women for a long time.
Oh God. Yeah, I mean, I think there are some people who'd be pretty happy to be tortured by Monica Bellucci, but not non-consensually.
Yeah.
So they know where the bastard sleeps.
Yes.
And so they all head out to Carfax Abbey, which is a ruin, and they're They're destroying
Crates
the
of
boxes.
dirt. We got crates of dirt.
Crates of dirt, but now they're just piles of dirt because
Yep,
the crates are gone.
piles of dirt.
And now there's fire and Van Helsing is
Crosses.
he's got his cross out and he's saying prayers as a doctor does.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we see the Batman hanging from the ceiling.
Ah, yes.
We have our next. This isn't even his final form.
We're so far from his final form.
A hairless man bat.
Yeah. Mina is ushered, quote unquote, safely into Seward's madhouse, right, to be kept safe.
Yeah. And is this where she meets Renfield?
Yes, I think she goes to see him while he's like, Seward brings her in, and he's like, and she's like, wait, who's that?
Yes, they finally have a scene. Renfield is part of the story now.
Mm-hmm.
Renfield gives
briefly, for a very brief moment.
Renfield tells her to get out of there.
Mm-hmm. He calls himself a sane man fighting for his soul, which is probably we've been following like the Renfield knock sympathy meter. I think we've rapidly fallen off that because more recent ones had versions of this story have not really emphasized that. But that was a sad point.
I'm no lunatic man. I'm a sane man fighting for his soul.
Oh my goodness, save it for the ending.
There are too many lines to choose from. But yeah, no. Nina is visited by some green smoke that becomes a man in her bed under her covers.
Literally looks like the Green Goblin. Oh man, I forgot to say. I think it's when they're in Lucy's mausoleum. Van Helsing is wearing a cape and he pulls out his sword and he legitimately looks like Samwise Gamgee from The Lord of the Rings. I was like, oh my goodness, what movie is this for a second?
Yeah, it's a vibe.
Which is crazy because that movie was made only those movies were made only 8-9 years after this, which is bonkers.
Well, that's when they came out, right?
Yeah.
So they were,
they were filming them in the 90s.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. So the Dracula's upset. He kills Renfield to death because Renfield says.
Also, Renfield has been wearing multiple costumes. Also, all madhouse, one with really long arms,
an untied straitjacket.
Yeah, very very interesting.
So I don't think he has any scenes with Gary Oldman. Is the thing.
It's all Tom Waits.
Yeah, Tom Waits just throws himself at the bars until his neck snaps.
Yeah.
But yeah, then Dracula's horny, so he goes from there to Mina, and is in her bed, and they have some back and forth there, where it's really hard to track what's going on in their heads. I get what's going on in his head. I'm not quite sure what's going on in her head.
Yeah, I think this is her. I think this is her, kind of owning her power in a way, which is not owning her power, but she very much has the I want you, I don't want Jonathan, I want to be a vampire, I want to be with you forever, etc.
Yeah, and she kind of has some memories of being Elisabetta, but also when Dracula finally says his name to her, which I guess until this point he hadn't, right? He was Prince Vlad, and now he says Dracula, and she's like, "You're the one to kill Lucy,"
yeah.
Which she's briefly upset about.
Yeah, and then she's like, "But I love you. God forgive me, I do."
Yeah, and then he's going to turn her, but then he's not going to turn her, but then she insists.
Yeah. The bite is quite violent.
Yeah, he ravishes her neck.
Yeah,
and then
she's in pain.
Slices open his own chest right under the nipple.
Yeah.
For her to drink from a little bit.
And then blue balls her for a minute on the blood thing.
Yeah, he's like, "No, I'm not going to condemn you to this eternal hell," because sometimes this movie decides that Dracula is sympathetic.
Right.
Sometimes.
When Mina's in the room, occasionally.
It's pretty chaotic.
Yeah.
I do kind of want to find the original script because I'm so curious how it read, because I suspect things changed radically over the production, as happens. But I'm so curious, if the scene was in that original script, how did it read? What actually happens here?
This feels like a pivotal scene.
Well, it does, because she does drink his blood.
It's their consummation.
Yeah, and then the boys break in.
There's a lot of licking also.
It's the kind of thing where you either find it really sexy or really gross. And guess where I fall?
I think we're on the same page for that one.
By the way, it should be noted that Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire novels exist well before the production of this movie. So the idea of the tortured gothic vampire lover character exists. Like that is in the zeitgeist.
But I guess it's worth noting, as disgusting as all this is, Mina is an active participant as far as like whether it's his magic, whether it's her old Elizabeth self, whatever it is, she wants to be stuck in his hell with him forever.
Yeah, she's tangoing.
Yeah, exactly.
But while they are, it looks like they're just fully having sex.
I think so, yeah, at that point.
The boys bust in. She's just kind of writhing in midair against nothing because Bat Boy's on the ceiling.
Yep.
There's some banter between him and Helsing.
Yeah. Look what your god has done to me.
Yeah, there's some argument about like whether Vlad the Impaler was a problematic figure in history. He's like, no, I was betrayed. Like, it's like you've done a lot of awful things, Dracula.
Oh my gosh, is this where he turns into a bunch of rats?
Yeah, so he's kind of backed off a bit. Like the cross doesn't work, but I forget how they do manage to scare him. But they do manage to scare him.
Need a bigger cross.
But Dracula backs off into a dark cupboard, and when they raise a light, it's just a pile of rats, which is a cool effect. I love that effect. But the rats all run out of there, and they realize, like, oh, we have Dracula on the run, which means he's afraid of us, but none of us will be safe until we get him.
Mm-hmm. And also
Mina's got a ticking clock on her now because she is slowly becoming a vampire.
Because if you kill the sire, to use Buffy terms, vampire, then you stop the transforming vampire from becoming a vampire.
Sure. I don't know if they ever
spelled that out. And that's why the kids are okay, because they kill Lucy.
Yeah. I don't know if the kids drank her blood. Can you imagine? But anyway, it should be noted that earlier in the movie, Van Helsing does say the word Nosferatu.
Yes. Oh, man, we missed. Goodness me.
He does say it. But
Nosferatu.
Yeah, he's Nosferatu, a vampire.
It would be a really funny, like, supercut of just everyone kind of ending up saying it the exact same way and trying to pronounce it with an accent, like.
Yeah, but yeah, no. Now they are they're chasing Dracula across Europe,
and he is in a box.
He's in a box. He's in a beautiful gold gown, kabuki gown.
It's like a head and two hands sticking out.
Yeah, and he's just kind of sitting there with his eyes open, his mouth open, and it's sort of like a cross between looking really dead and looking kind of dumb. It's kind of great. It's
not even his final form.
This man has forms upon forms, but they're chasing him around, and
Jonathan's hair, by the way, was white at one point, and now it is no longer white.
There isn't continuity with what his hair is doing, but so now we have Van Helsing, Harker, Seward, Homeward, and Cowboy Man with
Quincy.
With Mina, who because she has a sense of where Dracula is, they're using her to track him. But it becomes clear that he's doing the same thing to them because he knows what's in her head, and so they have to split up. So Van Helsing takes Mina separately, and
there's some slightly problematic chasing against. Again, it seems like they're supposed to be Roma people who are on Dracula's side.
Yeah, there's some. He's got mercenaries, I guess, who are kind of faceless. But first, we have Van Helsing and Mina alone on the Borgo Pass. What was that?
Well, because Mina is becoming a vampire, and I don't know if you noticed this, but lady vampires are whores. She kind of tries to seduce Van Helsing.
Is this before or after the brides show up?
I think this is like before, just before.
Yeah, so Mina kind of has that shift where now she's Elisabetta, but she's also kind of Dracula, and she's like, I know that Mina had feelings for you, and Van Helsing's pretty down to kiss her.
He is immediately down. She kisses him, and he's like, "Oh, cool, we're doing this."
He just likes the cut of her smell, and you know.
And of course, she tries to bite him, and he's like, "Oh no, I didn't see that coming."
Yeah, he burns a communion wafer into her forehead.
Mm-hmm.
He
It's the only use of wafers in the movie, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, we got wafers now. The brides show up and they kill Van Helsing's horse in shadow puppet form.
Yes, that was sad.
It's sad, poor horse. It's pretty cool that it's in shadow puppet form.
Mm-hmm.
But it's okay because he during the day he sneaks into their beds and kills them while they're asleep. And then
Mina and Van Helsing have gotten to Castle Dracula at this point.
Yeah, they're there now. Van Helsing's gone inside. He's chopped off the heads of the brides.
Throws them into.
She's way better at doing than Harker. he carries them kind of like that classic picture of Saint Nicholas.
Yeah.
With the 3 heads.
Yeah.
He tosses them and he calls out, Dracula! Gary!
And then also Mina is also calling for Dracula, but now she speaks Romanian.
Yeah, well, we have this big kind of climax now where all the boys have arrived. Mm-hmm. They're chasing the carriage that carries Dracula's coffin. They're having like an Indiana Jones fight with the stunt people playing the Roma mercenaries, who I will admit that while the action is kind of cool in the abstract, I could not make out who was who, where was where. They're racing against the sun. Mina speaks some Romanian to cast a spell that looks a lot like that blue circle fire.
Yeah.
To blot out the sun.
Right.
And
which, again, unclear why that's necessary. Maybe just the Romanian sun is dangerous for Dracula.
I guess he's just more powerful when there's no sun.
I guess
he's got a strength of 20 men or more, as Van Helsing puts it.
This is the type of thing that maybe like 45 minutes ago would have been interesting, but
this scene kind of straddles like cool blockbuster and like cheap feeling.
Yeah.
Because we're outdoors, but we're clearly indoors, and it's all stunt people, and it feels kind of like a Universal Studios stunt show a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Quincy gets stabbed in the back.
Sad, I guess.
And it's like, oh no, but who will do a bad Texas accent?
Yeah.
The sun drops. Dracula explodes out of his box in his beautiful golden gown. Quincy slices his throat. Dracula and kind of stabs him a little bit, and Dracula's backing on off.
And it's ironic because Van Helsing at one point, I think, told Quincy to not use a gun, but use a Bowie knife, and he was like, I'm not planning on getting that close. So
yeah,
he does.
It's Chekhov's knife. We saw it originally as innuendo.
Exactly.
And now it's a knife. And everybody's kind of getting closer, but Mina's like, stay back. And she's like threatening Harker and saying, would you do the same to me when I turn? He's like, no. Whoa.
Whoa, I never thought of that one.
And she and Dracula back off into the castle. And I'm pretty sure that, like, Quincy being the one to stab Dracula is from the book.
I think so.
Canonically, Dracula is stabbed by a cowboy.
Yeah, and Quincy dies.
Yeah, poor Quincy, R.I.P.
Never cared about you.
Movie goes a little bit longer, where Mina...
Well, it turns into Mina's ending.
It does. It also becomes the Passion of the Christ of Joan of Arc, and this movie kind of bounces around of, is Dracula a villain or a tragic hero?
Yeah. Well, so what happens is they're in the church sanctum, basically where in the 5 years ago, at the beginning of the movie, Gary Oldman saw Elisabetta dead.
Stab the cross.
Yes, exactly. And then they kiss, and she stakes him through the heart with love. And
yeah, and then the light of God morph affects him back into Gary Oldman.
And the cross,
which, by the way, it should be mentioned that until this point he had kind of a funky face going on.
Yes,
that's his final form.
And she kisses that full on latex face. It's a lot.
I think Gary Oldman had occasional allergic reactions to the latex.
Okay, latex can actually be dangerous, but whatever. If you have an allergy, that can be dangerous. But yeah, and the
cookie scar is gone.
The cookie scar's gone. The cross heals. All is well, and then she cuts off his head.
Yeah, it heals from the wound that he does to it in the 1400s. Mm-hmm. So her chopping off the head, that was George Lucas's idea. Apparently, Lucas watched the cut and was like, well, in Vampire Lore, to be really sure, you got to chop off the head.
Mm-hmm.
So she's already staked him through to the ground. But now they do a little bit of reshoots just to get that last little bit of like, oh Jesus Christ, she chops off his head, which I love.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it's perfectly fitting with everything. And then a heavenly choir sings, and
good night, my sweet prince.
Yeah, we don't have to see anyone else. This is maybe the most interesting part of the way this movie is constructed to me. That like we do not get any kind of resolution with, Jonathan or Van Helsing or Quincy. Well, I guess we know that Quincy dies, but like the end of the movie is just the two of them in this room. And it's their story, and it's specifically Mina's story because she's the one who takes that final action.
It is interesting that the thing that this movie is most preoccupied with is the one, like, considering that this is Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula 1992. It's the thing that they brought that wasn't in the book.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing that they are most excited about. The idea of this epic romance with reincarnation and a vampire and all of that fun stuff. And the last shot of the movie is the stained glass ceiling of Dracula and Elisabetta like flying through heaven with the sun coming out behind the clouds. And thus concludeth the film.
Yeah. Maybe my favorite ending.
Really? But you said boo.
I know.
You booed the credits.
I was very glad for it to be over, but considering it out of context, I think that I'm trying to think. I mean, maybe second to Nosferatu 1922. But
sure.
I don't know. It's we don't have a Jonathan vamp. We don't have like the kind of stoppage that we have in 31. I think this might narratively be my favorite ending.
It is an interesting one, just looking at the whole back and forth of female agency in these movies.
Yeah.
How this feels like it sort of straddles the line. Because on one hand, it sort of punishes female sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And also does slowly turn Mina into a mind-controlled villain, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But also her flirting with Dracula is the whole core, and then she at the end is the one to deliver the killing blow.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels both her story and not in a sense. It feels kind of like for a long time it's not her story, but she kind of comes at the end and says, "I'm taking it back."
Right. Well, okay. To give it some credit, any epistolary novel that comes from sources from more than from more than two people is going to have a problem of perspective shift. And that's it's very hard to tell whose movie this is, and it's very hard to tell whose book Dracula is. Again, we start with Jonathan. Is it Jonathan's movie? It's not. Is it Mina's movie? Sort of. Is it Van Helsing's movie? Maybe. What about Seward? Where does Lucy play into all this?
Right, and that probably also speaks to just how difficult it is to adapt this book, because in every other version, these characters are folded into each other, because why do you need Homewood and Seward and Quincy?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you need Renfield and Harker?
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes sort of natural to combine them, and because in an epistolary novel, you have different people hanging out with different people and different perspectives. In a movie, it's kind of hard to give characters enough function that you really need all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue this movie does not need most of the characters that are in it.
No, I don't think so.
Again, these characters do not have inner lives, really, for the most part. Some of them do, but for the most part, the three suitors are basically, interchangeable.
Yes.
It's interesting.
I mean, there's a metaphor of that, the fact that they all give her blood,
it
has the same effect as one of them giving her blood, which is none.
She has the blood of three men. Well, really, but it is interesting that the only person who really has an arc in this movie. Well, actually, do any of them have an arc in this movie? I mean, they have.
Oh, that's a complicated question.
Because, you could argue that Dracula changes, but not really. He's defeated. He's upset. Mm-hmm. He has ups and downs, but I don't think he quite learns a lesson. I think I guess God makes that choice for him.
No, I might actually argue that he does, because doesn't he ask her to stake him at the end?
That's true.
So I feel like if you start the movie with his abandonment by God and turning violently against that, and then his resolution is that he wants to rejoin with God,
It is pretty funny that the main arc in this story is a redemption arc for Dracula.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is.
Yeah.
And Mina's supports that.
Yeah, 'cause she doesn't really change as much as kind of go through phases. If that, like she sort of takes things into consideration and then kind of lands where she started.
Oh, I don't think she lands where she started at all.
You don't think so?
No, she stabs the man she loves through the heart and then cuts off his head.
Right, but at that point she okay, fair, I guess fair enough because I guess when she first, it feels like she has an arc that starts from the scene where she learns that he's Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because until that point, she is a Harker's fiance, kind of a mild mannered, decent person, has a friend.
Mm-hmm.
She starts to have a dalliance with the prince, which is a little bit of an infidelity,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess sort of feels a little bit like one could say that could lead to an arc, but she doesn't quite come back from that.
Right, because it's not resolved with Jonathan.
It's never resolved with Jonathan. She learns that he's the person who is killing her friend, like the one who killed her friend, and the monster that everybody's hunting. And that's the first moment where she actually realizes that this person's actually important.
Mm-hmm.
Really, even though I think at that point Jonathan has already pointed him out to her, but
he's freaked out, I think, when he sees him.
Yeah, but so like kind of from this point to the end, that's when she has an arc from I am fully in the tank for Dracula to I am willing to sacrifice Dracula, but he's kind of on the outside, right?
So I don't think that the point of the arc is her relationship to Dracula. I think the point of the arc is her relationship to like her own capacities. Like I think her arc very much starts with her being like, I am just a schoolmistress and I'm typing and I want to kiss my fiance more than I can. And we end with like, I mean, if you want to get really, really literal about it, her performing a penetration.
True. It feels fuzzy to me.
I feel disgusting. I need to take a shower now. Like...
It feels fuzzy to me, and I think it's just because I don't know that she would have been incapable of this at the beginning.
Oh, I do. Okay. I think she would have been too, like, I think part of the evolution with Lucy is Mina starting to see herself as the main character. And her, like, embracing the relationship with Dracula is her sort of, like, stepping into that. And then it just takes a different form when she has to kill him.
I hear it and I buy it. I don't feel it.
Okay.
But I do get what you're saying. I think it makes sense.
Also part of what I'm getting this from is not I mean, I do think it's in the text, but I think like the way Winona Rider like looks up after she has decapitated Dracula has massive like main female character heroine energy to me. It's just like radiating off her. And that feels like a distinct change from like her, you know, her hair's down, she's like dressed differently than when we first see her. Like it's a strong visual arc.
So I guess that's kind of the final girl thing you were talking about, of somebody who wasn't the fighter to somebody who was. I guess I just wish it was more. I guess I just wish it was more evident in the choices she makes, because I feel like I can't really track her choices.
Yeah, I don't think that's wrong. I think that's what they're going.
Yeah, no, I buy that. That makes sense.
Admittedly, there's so many versions of Gary Oldman. It's very hard to pay attention to almost anything else.
And it's funny that they kind of tried to sort of give Van Helsing like a flaw, but kind of incidentally. So like, there's room, I guess, for an arc for him, but it's a little late and a little random.
Yeah, I don't know. The last thing he does really is like throw the ladies' heads off the cliff, which is something he wanted to do the whole time, and as we know, like gets his rocks off. So like,
yeah. Apologies to James V. Hart. I'm sure you did a stellar job, and I haven't read what you originally wrote, and I'm very proud that you made a classic. But
that damn Coppola ruining his script.
No, there are things about this movie that I really like, and they are all on the aesthetic side. Mm-hmm. And there are things about this movie that do not work for me, and they are on a storytelling level, and also a little bit on the aesthetic side.
I think to me, okay, 30 years out, it's a little bit difficult to like track, I guess what's intentionally schlock and what is just 90s, you know, coming fresh off the 80s. Um, I think that like that is where some of the tonal confusion comes from me.
Yeah, it's interesting because it really just on its face, like putting aside the issues that I have with character and story,
Mm-hmm.
like it's a hoot, you know.
Yes.
It's a wild ride, and it's.
I'm surprised this is not played at like more conventions, like late at night.
Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine that there's screenings at the Alamo Draft House, you know, because it's big and it's colorful and it's clearly got like an artist behind it. It's not just sort of throwing money at a wall to see what sticks.
Definitely.
It's making big choices. I don't think they all work, but they are also specific. The aesthetic is so specific. I just wish it was stronger on a story level. I wish that I'm sort of back and forth between finding the miscast of Keanu Reeves like endearing and finding it distracting.
There's so many of those things, right? Like,
yeah.
Is it really cool that they? I mean, it is on a like intellectual level really cool that they went with period appropriate effects. But would it have been better, like for the film overall, if they had gone with contemporary effects? And maybe it wouldn't, because that would look like garbage today, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the effects are some of my favorite things about this movie. Yeah, just the way that they pull.
So I'm saying like they it's really cool that they did that. The craft is incredible, but does it serve the movie as much as like, you know?
Right. It's interesting to see, just kind of pulling back a little bit, comparing to the other Draculas, just on a tone level. We're going to tackle the Dracula story as a big, entertaining, just kind of a blockbuster.
Mm-hmm. It's very Phantom of the Opera, honestly.
Yeah, and it's not really here to scare us. Like, it's not I would not say, well, I mean, what's your scaredy cat rating on this one?
That's a good question. Like, is it like in my soul? It's like a 10. 10 scaredy cats. On a, like, was I actually scared? Probably like a 4.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Like, it doesn't feel like it's all about building tension and building.
No, it's not an intimidating movie.
It's a spectacle, right? And it's funny to take the book, which is designed to be blood curdling, right? Mm-hmm. You're reading people's accounts of horrors that have happened, and like, because it's epistolary, it's supposed to feel real,
right?
And it's like, let's make it a big carnival show,
right?
You know, let's have special effects that not only aren't realistic, they're going to call attention to themselves as a big, unusual, come take a look at our big throwback fancy special effects.
Right.
Like, let's look at like the sets, the real, like come look, we built sets for the woods. Mm-hmm. You know, come look, we've got Dracula's dressed in a big colorful gown, and now he's this creature, now he's that creature. Like, it's not.
Is he wearing red? Is he wearing gold? Who can tell?
Yeah, it's not interested in scaring you with nuance.
Right.
It just kind of wants to show.
There's no implication.
It's Grand Guignol.
Yeah.
It's Grand Guignol, which is a take, and it's interesting to compare it to the others.
I thought that was actually supposed to be scary.
Well, it's gory. Right? Like here, like, you can do the scene that they do here where a wolf comes in through the window and kills Lucy in her bed. That could be really scary. Mm-hmm. But instead, it's done as this big operatic thing that climaxes with blood cannons.
I think opera is actually a really good word to describe all this.
That's true. Down to the costuming,
yeah.
And the sets,
yeah.
You know, the design of it all. It's opera.
Yeah, very much so. So the interesting thing that you mentioned after, because I asked you, was kind of what, like, obviously this movie did make a big impact, but what impact it made specifically on, like, vampires in pop culture. And you mentioned that, like, this kind of paved the way not for Anne Rice's vampires to become, like, popular, but for that film to be also, it's like the, like, grand event that it is.
Yeah, this movie was a big hit. Critics on the whole liked it. Mm-hmm. It won Oscars. It saved American Zoetrope. It paved the way for...
Or was it just undead?
Well, I mean, Coppola's next movie was the Robin Williams misfired Jack, which is considered a low point in his career. But that's neither here nor there. It paves the way for epic monster movies. Mm-hmm. You know, it's actually funny. This led directly to a dark universe of sorts in the 90s where you have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, directed by and starring Kenneth Branagh.
Oh my God, that guy!
And starring Robert De Niro as the monster, and written also by James B. Hart. And produced by Francis Ford Coppola. It was actually kind of the spiritual follow-up to this.
That's interesting.
Mike Nichols directed Wolf, starring Jack Nicholson as a werewolf. There was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde movie with John Malkovich and Julia Roberts called Mary Riley. There was a cycle of these big, lavish period piece monster movies that were sort of like prestige movies in the wake of this, that had healthy budgets, that were all about their production design and their costumes and being serious literature to a degree. And the Neil Jordan, the director of the 1994 film Interview with the Vampire, was inspired by this movie to make that movie, because this showed you can do the epic vampire romance on a grand scale. And
just make it less gay.
1994. It was as gay as they can get.
Have you watched the show, by the way?
Not yet.
I've heard it's incredible.
So have I. I am so behind on TV because I'm too busy watching Nosferatu movies. But I have seen the Interview with the Vampire movie at a young age. Well. Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt and Kirsten Dunst.
Crazy. Kirsten Dunst is so good in that movie.
Yeah, no, this movie affected the aesthetic of genre movies for a moment, especially literary genre movies, because suddenly they were serious. They were contenders. They were studio movies that had big stars and costumes and sets and were operatic but taken seriously, and it wasn't disposable.
Right.
And it is actually kind of funny to realize in an age where IP drives $100 million movies that have to make $1 billion to even break even, that it took this long to get an expensive Dracula movie.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm trying to think, what is the next expensive Dracula movie? Obviously, you have Van Helsing in 2004, which, directed by Stephen Sommers of the Mummy franchise. The Mummy from
That's what we watched the opening to?
Yeah. Okay. So Van Helsing, starring Hugh Jackman, as a swashbuckling, vampire-fighting, Pope-approved Gabriel Van Helsing, I think they call him in that.
Okay.
He's running around fighting Dracula and werewolves and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the Wolfman is there, and the Frankenstein monster is there, and it's this big love letter to the Universal Studios horror movies, and big flop, but cost a lot. There was a... God, who starred in this? I have to triple check this. But Dracula Reborn.
Oh.
In 2012, they were trying to start sorry. Well, there was Dracula 2000 starring Gerard Butler. Which
my YouTube has been populated suddenly with like a bunch of clips from that.
They made a trilogy of that. They're not.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we forgot to mention, I think this is worth bringing up now that we're just going endlessly into the night with this podcast. There's, this so far has not like been a thing really, but it's probably this is the closest we've gotten so far, which is it doesn't really translate over a podcast, but like I'm basically pulling at one strand of my hair over my forehead and just like leaving it there. And then, like, what the origin of this as the Dracula thing? It's in the Van Helsing. Like, the guy like actually specifically pulls out one strand of hair to do that.
The actor who plays Dracula in Van Helsing is doing such a hammy performance. It's so fun, and he has long bangs and a ponytail. And in 2014, you have Dracula Untold, which was supposed to launch a whole franchise. It didn't do that, but this was supposed to be like the origin story of anti-hero Dracula. Vlad Dracula in Transylvania in the 15th century, starring Luke Evans.
Oh, was that? So, well, no, this is probably...
And Dominic Cooper is in it.
Oh, man.
It's, it had a budget between... Oh, well,
Ramin Djawadi did the music, I mean.
Yeah, and it had a budget between... Oh, and by the way, this was Universal. Universal distributed it. This was their first attempt at trying to bring back their monsters. They were going to have an interconnected shared universe, because that was the thing at the time. It cost somewhere between $70 and $100 million, made internationally something like a little over 200. That's considered a flop. Critics hated it. But it's interesting that kind of taking that into account, there haven't been a ton of massive budget, like blockbuster Dracula movies. There have been Dracula movies with healthy budgets.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was the Stephen Moffat, Mark Gatiss miniseries on the BBC a few years ago that was pretty big, and obviously, you know, he continues to show up everywhere. But but I think 1992's Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula on Ice, the musical, What Would John Harker Do, is kind of just important as the lavish Dracula. Like, I don't think we really have another truly lavish studio Dracula on that scale.
Fascinating. I guess we can move on to our Nosferatu rating.
I got nothing.
For me, this is Winona Rider's Jewish, and the Catholicness is so overwhelming in this movie because it's aesthetic that like there's just no room for anything else. Like there's actually almost no room for Dracula to be a metaphor. He's too many things, also, right? Like he's a wolf, he's a bat, he's a man bat, he's a big wolf, he's a bunch of rats. He's like, because it's so multi-fanged, multi-pronged, it almost loses meaning other than like he can turn into stuff.
Yeah, this feels like the first Dracula that we looked at where you really can't say this is the generic foreigner or the Jew coming in to destroy society.
And you know what is also important? Because there's no plague element. This isn't a social thing. This is really just a personal thing.
Yeah, he's just a stalker in this one.
Yeah.
He's a stalker and a rapist and also Jesus Christ. Yeah. Happy Christmas Eve.
Oh my goodness.
No, it is fitting that on Christmas Eve we are talking about the single most Christian Dracula that we've seen so far.
Absolutely.
Coppola was raised Catholic. I don't think he is a religious person. I think he does enjoy the iconography just for metaphor purposes. But I did see a quote from him where he was saying that when he grew up, he just thought nuns were mean. Yeah. So I don't know where he really stands on all of that. It's not. This movie isn't like church propaganda. It doesn't feel like it's made by believers. It does feel like it enforces Christianity as hegemonic.
Yes, I don't think it's propaganda as much as it's like, again, that kind of like default, you know. Like, which is hegemonic. That's what you said. But like, the idea that like, of course, these things are going to affect Dracula, and you know, we don't even have to really like explain it, and you know, the idea of his origin specifically being like a fight with God and like a transformation into the devil, which is, you know, very Paradise Lost, is, I don't know, I would lean more into like that being more deliberate and more intentional than, I don't even know what words are anymore.
We've been talking for a while. I have to say that I have the Wikipedia for Dracula Untold out right now, and my mouse is hovering over the poster, and the hypertext that popped up next to it just says, "A man walking away from a large amount of bats." Yeah, Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's...
1992's Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
American Zoetrope presents a Columbia Pictures production of 1992's Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, featuring Gary Oldman, but also Gary Youngman. And
on ice, on fire,
on ice, on fire, on stage, in our hearts and minds and souls and in our dreams.
Forever.
This movie is special.
Yeah. I think it's probably appropriate that it took us this long to discuss it, but
yeah.
To pull out to zoom out a little bit. Oh my goodness.
God damn it. Oh my god, this movie leeches into our soul.
It really does. What are we talking about next time, Avishai?
Well, this has been our 4th episode. We are intending 6 for our first season. We know where that culminates. Mm-hmm. And I want to pull us right back to the source of Nosferatu. And so next we are going to see a movie about the making of the original Nosferatu, the true story of what really happened, Shadow of the Vampire.
Oh, cool. All right, Shadow of the Vampire. And we will be seeing a familiar face in this movie, right?
Yes, we will.
Yeah.
There's some fun overlap that happens, and also just some faces of people you'll just recognize from knowing who actors are.
Yeah. We're in that era now. It's very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, if you would like to find us on the internet, well, Avishai, where are you on the internet?
I am on Instagram at Avishai Oddity. That's AVISHAIODDITY, and on Blue Sky, just look for Avishai Weinberger.
And I am on Blue Sky, Ink as Rain, INKASRAIN, and also Instagram, I guess. Our amazing editor is Jamie Blumberg. You can
Thank you,
find
Jamie.
them. Thank you, Jamie. Yeah.
Finally, we're crediting you.
Yeah. We did last time.
Yes.
So you can find Jamie at jamberg.me, and they're also on Mastodon, and I'll have to check in with them if they're on any other socials right now. Yeah, so we'll be back next time with Shadow the Vampire, and until then,
Yeah, of course.
can I just take the big one?
Sure.
I have crossed oceans of time to find you.
We've all become God's madmen. All of us.
Adios.
See ya.